Tonight, we gather in this quiet space to receive what the Buddha has always offered freely: a way out of suffering, a path to peace, a method for transforming our relationship with life itself. You don't need to be Buddhist to receive this gift. You only need to be willing to listen. This is Buddha Bedtime Stories, where the ancient becomes immediate, where wisdom serves your present moment need for rest and clarity. Before we journey deeper, please tell me, what time is it where you are? And from what corner of the world are you listening? I'd love to know. The teachings we explore tonight aren't abstract concepts. They're practical wisdom about your mind, your emotions, your daily struggles. The Buddha wasn't interested in philosophy for its own sake. He wanted to end suffering, yours and everyone's. Let these stories seep into you like rain into dry earth. Don't try to hold on to them or figure them out. Just let them nourish something deep within that knows how to grow toward light. Now, settle yourself with intention. Your body deserves to be comfortable, supported, completely at ease. Make whatever adjustments call to you. Close your eyes and take a conscious breath, slow and full. As you exhale, imagine releasing this entire day. Breathe in again, this time welcoming peace, and let go completely. We're ready now. Let's begin with our first story. In a mountain village, there lived a child named Hoshi, whose name meant star. He was a curious boy, always asking questions, always trying to understand how things worked. His parents admired his inquisitive mind and encouraged his questions. One clear night, Hoshi lay on his back looking at the sky full of stars. They were so numerous, so bright in the mountain air, so beautiful. As he looked, a question formed in his mind. How many stars are there? He decided to count them. He began with the stars directly overhead, assigning each one a number. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time he reached 30, he had already lost track of which ones he had counted and which he hadn't. He tried to organize them into groups, into patterns, but the more he tried to count, the less he could simply see them. His grandfather came out and found Hoshi staring at the sky with an intense, frustrated expression. "What are you doing, little star?" his grandfather asked, using the family nickname. "I'm trying to count the stars," Hoshi replied, not taking his eyes from the sky. "But they keep moving. Or maybe my eyes are moving. I can't keep track. How can I count them if they won't stay still?" His grandfather sat down beside him. "Why are you counting them?" "Because I want to know how many there are." "And if you knew how many there were, what would change?" Hoshi thought about this. "I would know. I would understand." "Would you?" His grandfather laid back on the grass beside him. "Tell me, before you started counting, when you were just looking at the stars, what did you feel?" Hoshi remembered. "I felt wonder. They were so beautiful. I felt small, but also somehow connected to them. Like they were very far away, but also touching me with their light." "And now? While you're counting?" "Now I feel frustrated, confused. I keep losing count. The beauty is still there, but I'm not seeing it anymore. I'm just seeing numbers." His grandfather was quiet for a while, letting Hoshi sit with his own observation. Finally, he said, "Not everything is meant to be counted, measured, or understood. Some things are meant to be experienced. The stars don't care how many of them there are. They just shine. And you can either spend your time trying to number them, or you can receive their light. But don't you want to know? Hoshi asked. Don't you want to understand? I know the stars are beautiful, his grandfather replied. I know they've been shining since before humans existed and will shine after we're gone. I know that their light traveled vast distances to reach my eyes. I know that looking at them makes something in my chest feel open and quiet. Those are the things worth knowing. How many there are? That's a question that turns the sky into a math problem. Hoshi stopped counting and just looked. His grandfather was right. The moment he stopped trying to number the stars, he could see them again. Really see them. The way they shimmered, the way some were bright and others faint, the way they formed patterns that his ancestors had named, the way they made the night less dark. Everything you count or measure, his grandfather continued, you transform from an experience into data. Data is useful for some things, but it can never capture what it feels like to lie on your back and watch stars shine. It can never measure wonder. It can never quantify the feeling in your chest when beauty takes your breath away. A shooting star streaked across the sky. Hoshi gasped with delight, and his grandfather smiled. If you had been counting at that moment, his grandfather said, you might have missed it. You would have been too busy tracking which number you were on, making sure you didn't count the same star twice. You would have been in your head instead of being present to this moment. As Hoshi grew older, he remembered that night often. He noticed how his urge to quantify and measure things sometimes pulled him out of direct experience. When he ate something delicious, his mind would immediately start comparing it to other meals, rating it, analyzing its components. When he saw a beautiful sunset, he would try to describe it, to capture it in words, losing the direct experience in the attempt to translate it. He learned to notice this pattern and sometimes choose differently. Sometimes he would let experiences be experiences without trying to understand them, explain them, measure them, or capture them. He would just receive them directly, the way he had learned to receive starlight. Years later, Hoshi became a teacher. Students would come to him with questions about meditation, about enlightenment, about the nature of reality, and often he would take them outside at night and tell them to look at the stars. How many are there? He would ask. The students would start trying to count, and he would let them struggle for a while. Eventually, they would give up, frustrated. I can't count them, they would say. There are too many. They keep shifting. I lose track. So stop counting, Hoshi would reply. Just look. Experience the stars without trying to understand them intellectually. Let them be what they are without needing to measure them, categorize them, or explain them. He would let them lie there in silence, just experiencing the night sky. And usually something would shift. The students who had arrived full of questions, full of the need to understand and explain and intellectually grasp everything, would find themselves simply present, simply aware, simply experiencing without the mediating layer of thought. Some of your questions are like counting stars, Hoshi would tell them. They turn experience into problems to solve. They transform presence into analysis. Your mind asks these questions to feel like it's doing something useful. But often what's most useful is to stop asking and just be present to what is. But how do we know if we're making progress? Students would ask. How do we measure our growth? Hoshi would smile. You're counting stars again. Progress in meditation isn't something you measure, it's something you experience. You know you're growing not because you can quantify it, but because you notice you're suffering less, responding to life more skillfully, feeling more at peace. These are experiences, not numbers. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, notice if your mind is counting stars. Is it trying to measure your relaxation? Track your progress towards sleep? Analyze whether you're doing this correctly. Is it turning the simple experience of resting into a problem to solve or a performance to evaluate? What if you stopped counting? What if you let this moment be an experience instead of a measurement? What if you received rest the way you receive starlight, directly, without trying to quantify it, or understand it, or capture it? Some things are meant to be lived, not analyzed. Some moments are meant to be experienced, not examined. Tonight is one of those moments. Let yourself be like the child who stopped counting and simply gazed at the stars, receiving their light without needing to know how many there were. That's enough. You're enough. This moment is enough. No counting necessary. In a mountain village, there lived a woman named Sayuri who had a reputation as an oracle. People would travel from distant places to seek her wisdom on important decisions. Should I marry this person? Should I pursue this business opportunity? Should I move to a new city? But Sayuri had an unusual way of responding to questions. She never gave direct answers. Instead, she would reply with more questions. A merchant came to her asking, "Should I invest in this new trade route?" Sayuri replied, "What would make that investment right for you? What would make it wrong? Which outcome could you live with more easily?" The merchant, frustrated, pressed her. "But what do you think I should do?" "Why does my opinion matter more than yours?" Sayuri asked. "You know your circumstances, your resources, your risk tolerance. I don't. How could my answer be better than the answer you would reach by examining your own wisdom?" People found this approach maddening. They wanted clear guidance, definite answers, someone to tell them what to do. Instead, Sayuri gave them questions that turned their attention inward. A young woman came asking whether she should accept a marriage proposal. "The man is suitable," she explained. "My family approves. But I feel uncertain." "What is the uncertainty?" Sayuri asked. "I don't know if I love him enough." "What is enough love for marriage?" Sayuri inquired. "Who defines that measure? And more importantly, what does your uncertainty tell you?" The young woman sat with these questions. Slowly, she realized she already knew her answer. The uncertainty wasn't confusion. It was clear trying to be heard beneath the noise of expectations and social pressure. She didn't want to marry this man. She had known it all along, but had been afraid to acknowledge it. "You already had your answer," Sayuri said when the woman expressed this realization. "You just needed permission to hear it. If I had told you what to do, you would have either resented me for the advice or become dependent on me for future decisions. But by asking questions, I helped you find your own wisdom. Now you trust yourself more than you did before." A farmer came with a more desperate question. His crops were failing, and he needed to decide whether to borrow money to try new methods or sell his land and find other work. "Please," he begged, "just tell me what to do. I can't decide." "What happens if you borrow and the new methods fail?" Sayuri asked. "I lose everything." "What happens if you sell the land?" "I lose my family's heritage, but I avoid debt." "Which loss could you live with?" Sayuri continued. "Losing everything, including your dignity, through failed debt? Or losing your land but keeping your freedom from debt? Which regret would be smaller?" The farmer thought deeply. He realized that he valued security over heritage. The land was important, but being debt-free was more important. Once he saw this clearly, his decision became obvious. "But what if I'm wrong?" he asked Sayuri. "What if you're right?" she countered. "Why assume the wrong choice is more likely than the right one? And even if you choose poorly, will you learn something? Will you adapt? Or will you be paralyzed forever by fear of making mistakes?" These questions shifted something in the farmer. He had been treating the decision as if one choice was absolutely right and the other absolutely wrong. But Sayuri's questions helped him see that both choices had consequences. Both involved trade-offs, and he needed to decide based on his values, not on some objective standard of rightness. Word spread about Sayuri's approach. Some people avoided her, frustrated that she wouldn't just give answers. But many sought her out precisely because she didn't. They recognized that her questions were a kind of teaching, helping them develop their own wisdom rather than borrowing hers. A Zen monk visited Sayuri, curious about her method. "You could make a good living telling people what to do," he observed. "They want certainty. They would pay well for it. Why do you refuse to give it?" "Because certainty from outside is false security," Sayuri replied. "If I tell someone what to do and it works out, they credit me and become dependent on me for future decisions. If it doesn't work out, they blame me and still haven't learned to trust themselves. Either way, I've made them weaker, not stronger." She poured tea for them both. "But when I ask questions that help them find their own answers, they become stronger. They learn to consult their own wisdom. They develop confidence in their decision-making. Even if they choose poorly, they learn from their own mistakes rather than blaming someone else." The monk nodded thoughtfully. "Your questions are a form of teaching. You're not withholding wisdom. You're pointing people toward the wisdom they already possess." "Exactly," Sayuri agreed. "Most people have more wisdom than they realize. They just don't trust it. They've been taught to look outside themselves for answers, to defer to authorities, to doubt their own judgment. My questions permit them to trust what they already know." She looked at the monk directly. "The same is true in meditation practice, isn't it? A good teacher doesn't give you enlightenment. They ask questions or create situations that help you recognize what's already there. The wisdom isn't imported from outside. It's revealed from within." "Yes," the monk agreed. "The best teaching is the teaching that makes itself unnecessary by helping students trust their own understanding." Years passed, and Sayuri grew old. People worried about who would replace her as the village oracle. But Sayuri refused to train a successor. "I haven't been giving answers," she said. "I've been asking questions." "Anyone can do that. You don't need a special oracle." You need to practice asking yourselves better questions. She taught the village a method. When facing a decision, ask yourself questions instead of seeking immediate answers. What do I value most in this situation? What outcome could I live with most easily? What does my hesitation tell me? What would I advise a friend in this situation? What do I already know that I'm afraid to acknowledge? These questions, Sayuri explained, are tools for excavating your own wisdom. The answers are already in you. You just need to dig them out from under the layers of fear, expectation, and conditioning. On her deathbed, surrounded by villagers who had come to thank her for her guidance over the years, someone asked, "Sayuri, what is the most important question?" Even then, she smiled and replied with a question. What question would help you most right now? And when you've answered that, what question would help you next? The most important question is always the one that moves you deeper into your own understanding. Tonight, as you rest, what questions might you ask yourself? Not demanding answers, not forcing resolution, just inquiring gently into your own experience. What am I feeling right now? What do I need in this moment? What wisdom am I carrying that I haven't yet listened to? What am I afraid to acknowledge? You don't need someone else's answers. You don't need an oracle or expert to tell you what to do, how to feel, who to be. The wisdom is already in you, has always been in you, waiting for the right questions to draw it out. Ask yourself questions tonight and listen for the answers that rise from your own depths. They're more trustworthy than anything someone else could tell you. Rest now in your own wisdom, asking and listening, questioning and discovering. The oracle you seek is you. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In a village garden, there lived a harmless snake that ate insects and kept the vegetable patch healthy. The gardener, an old man named Hideaki, appreciated the snake and would nod to it when he saw it sunning itself on stones or moving slowly through the rows of vegetables. The snake was small, no thicker than Hideaki's thumb, with gentle eyes and a pattern of brown and green scales that helped it blend with the garden soil. It had lived in the garden for several years, and Hideaki had watched it grow from a tiny hatchling to its current modest size. It was a completely harmless species, one that ate only insects and small slugs, never anything larger. The snake wanted nothing to do with humans and would quickly slither away if anyone approached too closely. But Hideaki's grandson, a boy named Kyo, who was 8 years old, was terrified of the snake. He had never been bitten, never been threatened, never had any negative encounter with it at all. But he had heard stories from other children about snakes being dangerous. His friend's older brother had told elaborate tales about venomous snakes that could kill a person with one bite. Another child had described snakes as evil creatures that attacked without warning. So every time Kyo caught a glimpse of the garden snake, he would run away screaming. His heart would race. His breath would come short and fast. His whole body would flood with terror. The sight of that small, harmless creature would send him into complete panic. Hideaki tried many times to reason with his grandson. "Kyo, this snake is harmless. See how small it is. Look at its gentle movements. It eats only insects. It helps our garden by keeping pests away. It wants nothing to do with humans. It's more afraid of you than you are of it. But Kyo wouldn't listen. His fear was too great, too consuming. The rational words his grandfather spoke couldn't penetrate the wall of terror that the very idea of the snake created in his mind. Logic had no power over the fear that gripped him. But snakes are dangerous, Kyo would insist. Everyone knows that. They bite people. They're scary. I don't want to go in the garden anymore. Hideaki was concerned. The boy's fear was keeping him from enjoying the garden, from helping with the vegetables, from the simple pleasure of being outdoors. The fear was limiting his life in ways that had nothing to do with actual danger. One late afternoon, Kyo was alone in the garden, sent by his mother to pick some tomatoes for dinner. He was moving carefully, nervously, constantly scanning the ground for any sign of the snake. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden path. Then he saw it. Something moving on the ground ahead of him. The shape was long and sinuous, definitely a snake. And this one was enormous, far larger than the small garden snake he had seen before. It must be a different snake, a dangerous one. The creature was at least as thick as his arm, maybe 6 or 7 feet long, moving slowly across the path. Terror seized Kyo completely. His legs locked. His breath stopped. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. He couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at this enormous serpent that was right in his path, blocking his way back to the house. The snake moved with a sinuous, menacing motion. Its body seemed to pulse and writhe. Kyo could see every detail of its threatening form. The dark color, the massive size, the way it seemed to be looking right at him, even though he couldn't see its head clearly. He stood there frozen, convinced he was about to be attacked, about to be bitten by this monster that had invaded his grandfather's garden. Minutes passed like hours. The snake continued its slow movement across the path, and Kyo remained paralyzed, watching it, unable to run or call for help. Finally, his grandfather came out of the house, having noticed that Kyo had been gone too long for such a simple errand. He found his grandson standing rigid with fear in the middle of the garden path, staring at the ground with eyes wide and face pale. "Kyo!" "What's wrong?" Hideaki called out, hurrying toward the boy. "A giant snake!" Kyo gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Right there! Look how huge it is! Grandfather, be careful!" Hideaki looked where his grandson was pointing. He saw the small garden snake, the same one that had lived there for years, sunning itself on the path, as it often did in the late afternoon. It was no bigger than it had ever been, perhaps 8 inches long, completely harmless. And nearby, stretching across the path in the low-angled light of the setting sun, he saw the snake's shadow. The shadow was indeed enormous, at least 6 feet long and thick, cast long and dark by the horizontal rays of the sun. The shadow looked menacing, serpentine, threatening. But it was just a shadow. Hideaki understood immediately what had happened. His grandson had seen the shadow and thought it was the snake, or thought it was a different, much larger snake. The boy's fear had locked onto the shadow and convinced him that he was seeing a genuine threat. "Kyo," Hideaki said gently, "come here. Come stand next to me." But Kyo couldn't move. I can't. The snake is in the way. It's huge, grandfather. It's dangerous. Trust me, Hideaki said, his voice calm and steady. Take my hand. I promise you're safe. Slowly, with trembling steps, Kyo moved toward his grandfather, keeping his eyes on the enormous snake the entire time, certain it would strike at any moment. Hideaki took his grandson's hand and led him closer to where the small garden snake lay on the path. As they approached, something remarkable happened. The shadow shortened. The closer they got, the smaller the shadow became. By the time they stood right next to the actual snake, which quickly slithered away into the vegetables, startled by their approach, the shadow was appropriately small, no more threatening than the creature that cast it. Kyo stared at where the snake had been, then at where its shadow had stretched across the path. His breathing was still rapid, his heart still pounding, but confusion was beginning to replace terror. "The shadow," he whispered. I thought the shadow was the snake, or a different snake, a huge one." "I know," Hideaki said, kneeling down beside his grandson. "Come, let me show you something." He picked up a stick from the ground, about the same size as the garden snake. In the low afternoon sun, he held it at different angles, casting its shadow on the path. When he held it close to the ground, the shadow was small. But when he held it higher, angled toward the sun, the shadow grew enormous, stretching across the entire path. "See?" Hideaki said. "Any small thing can cast a large shadow under the right conditions. The shadow tells you nothing about the actual size or danger of the thing. It just tells you about the light and the angle and your position relative to it." Kyo watched, fascinated despite his lingering fear, as his grandfather made the stick's shadow grow and shrink, made it look threatening or harmless just by changing the angle. "The snake didn't change," Hideaki continued. "It was always small and harmless. But the shadow changed based on the light, and you saw the shadow and thought it was showing you the truth about the snake. But shadows can lie, or rather, shadows can exaggerate. They can make something small look huge, something harmless look dangerous." He set down the stick and took both of Kyo's hands. "This is what fear does, grandson. Fear is like that low sun. It casts everything in shadow, making it look bigger and more dangerous than it actually is. The snake didn't change. Your perception of it changed based on angle, light, and most importantly, based on your expectation of danger." Over the following days, Hideaki worked with Kyo to help him understand not just the snake's shadow, but the nature of fear itself. He showed him how fear distorts perception, how it takes small threats and makes them seem enormous, how it turns harmless things into monsters. They did experiments together. In the late afternoon, when the sun was low, they would put various objects on the path and observe their shadows. A small toy mouse cast a shadow that looked like a large rat. A thin branch cast a shadow that looked like a serpent. A butterfly landing on a stone cast a shadow that seemed to flutter and pulse menacingly. "Everything looks more threatening in shadow," Hideaki explained. "And fear puts everything in shadow. When you're afraid, your mind sees threats everywhere. It exaggerates the size of dangers. It interprets ambiguous things as dangerous. It casts everything in the worst possible light. just like this low sun casts everything in exaggerated shadow. Kyo was beginning to understand. So when I'm afraid, I see shadows instead of real things. Exactly, his grandfather said. The fear came first, from the stories you heard, from the ideas you had about snakes being dangerous. Then, because you were already afraid, when you saw something that could be a snake, your fear made it look as threatening as possible. The shadow confirmed what you already feared. But it wasn't showing you reality, it was showing you your fear. They began a daily practice. Each afternoon, when the shadows were long, Kyo would go into the garden with his grandfather. They would look for the snake, and when they found it, they would observe both the snake and its shadow. Kyo would practice seeing them as separate things, the actual snake, small and harmless, and the shadow, which could be large or small depending on the light and angle. Slowly, over weeks, Kyo's fear began to diminish. He learned to check his first perception. When something looked threatening, he would ask himself, am I seeing the thing itself, or am I seeing its shadow? Am I responding to actual danger, or to fear's distortion of reality? One day, Kyo was in the garden alone when he saw the snake. His first impulse was still fear, that instant clench of his heart, that flash of terror. But now, he had tools to work with that fear. He stopped, took a breath, and looked more carefully. The snake was small, as it had always been. It was moving slowly through the lettuce, eating small insects. Its shadow in the bright midday sun was tiny and non-threatening. There was nothing here to fear. The actual snake was harmless. The shadow his fear had been casting was the real threat. Kyo didn't run. He watched the snake for several minutes, observing its gentle movements, the way it went about its business without any attention to him. He felt his fear dissolving, replaced by curiosity, and even a kind of appreciation. This creature was part of the garden's ecosystem, helpful and harmless. When he told his grandfather about this encounter, Hideaki smiled with deep satisfaction. You've learned something that will serve you far beyond this garden, he said. You've learned to distinguish between actual threats and the shadows that fear casts. Most of what frightens us in life is shadows, not substance. As Kyo grew older, he found this lesson applied to many areas of his life. When he was worried about starting at a new school, he recognized that his fear was casting shadows, making the unknown seem more threatening than it actually was. When he was anxious about speaking in front of his class, he understood that his imagination was creating enormous shadows of embarrassment and failure that were far larger than any actual consequence. He learned to ask himself the questions his grandfather had taught him. What is the actual thing I'm afraid of? How big is it really? And how much of what I'm seeing is the shadow cast by my own fear? Years later, when Kyo was a young man, he returned to his grandfather's garden. The old snake had long since died, but its descendants still lived there, keeping the garden healthy. Kyo could watch them without fear, even appreciate their elegant movements and their important role in the garden's balance. A neighbor's child was visiting, a little girl who was terrified of the snakes. She screamed when she saw one, just as Kyo had done years before. And Kyo found himself repeating his grandfather's lesson, showing her how the afternoon sun cast long shadows, demonstrating how fear make small things look huge. The shadow is not the thing, he told her, using the same words his grandfather had used with him. Your fear shows you shadows and tells you they're real. But if you look more carefully, if you change your angle, if you step closer, you'll see the actual thing is much smaller than its shadow suggests. He showed her the small snake, harmless and gentle, and then its exaggerated shadow in the late afternoon light. He helped her understand that she had been responding to the shadow of her own fear, not to any actual danger. Hideaki, now very old, watched this teaching being passed down and felt deep satisfaction. This was wisdom that could transform a life. The understanding that fear distorts perception, that we so often respond to shadows rather than reality, that most of what terrifies us is an exaggeration created by our own minds. One evening, Hideaki and Kyo sat together in the garden as the sun set, casting long shadows across everything. "You know," Hideaki said, "I've been thinking about this teaching we've shared, about snakes and shadows. It goes even deeper than I first realized." "How so?" Kyo asked. "Well, we talk about how fear creates shadows that make things look bigger than they are. But there's another side to it. Sometimes we need to see our own shadows, the parts of ourselves we're afraid of or ashamed of. We spend so much energy trying to hide our shadows, pretending they don't exist, that we never really look at them. And anything we refuse to look at has power over us." He pointed to their own shadows, stretched long in the setting sun. "Your shadow is part of you. You can't separate from it, but it's not you. It's just the outline you cast, the space you block from the light. The same is true of our inner shadows, our fears and flaws, and the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. They're part of us, but they're not all of us, and they only look monstrous when we refuse to look at them directly." Kyo thought about this. So, the lesson works both ways? Don't be afraid of shadows outside you because they're not as dangerous as they look. But also, don't be afraid of shadows inside you because they're just aspects of yourself, not monsters. "Exactly," Hideaki said. "Fear makes everything look worse than it is, whether it's a snake in the garden or a flaw in your own character. The solution is the same. Look directly at the thing itself, not at the shadow your fear is casting. When you look directly, with courage and honesty, you almost always find that the reality is more manageable than the shadow suggested." As night fell and the shadows merged into general darkness, Kyo reflected on all he had learned from one small garden snake and its shadow. The lesson had grown and deepened over the years, revealing new layers of meaning. What had started as a child's fear of a harmless creature had become a profound understanding about the nature of fear itself, about perception and reality, about how our minds create the very threats we're most afraid of. The garden snake, living its simple life among the vegetables, had been an unlikely teacher. But then Kyo had learned the best teachers often come in unexpected forms. Sometimes wisdom arrives not through grand revelations, but through small moments of noticing, through paying attention to shadows and light, through an old grandfather's patient guidance, and a child's eventual willingness to look more closely at what he feared. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what shadows you've been seeing. What fears in your life are casting exaggerated shadows, making things seem more threatening than they actually are. What worries have you been responding to as if they were huge and dangerous, when they might be quite small if you looked at them directly? Fear has a way of taking the unknown, the uncertain, the potentially difficult, and casting it in the worst possible light. Every ambiguous situation becomes threatening. Every challenge looks insurmountable. Every risk seems catastrophic. But these are shadows, distortions created by the angle of your perception and the intensity of your fear. What if you could see your fears in bright midday light instead of the exaggerated shadows of anxiety? What if you stepped closer to examine them, the way Kyo learned to approach the snake instead of running from it? You might find that the actual thing is much smaller, much less threatening than the shadow suggested. And what about the shadows within you? The parts of yourself you judge harshly, the flaws you try to hide, the aspects of your personality or your history that you're ashamed of. These cast shadows too. They look monstrous when you refuse to look at them, when you let fear tell you how terrible they are. But when you turn toward them with courage, when you examine them directly instead of avoiding them, you often find they're just human, just part of being alive, just aspects of yourself that need acknowledgement, not judgment. Rest now in the understanding that most of what frightens you is shadow, not substance. Your fears are real, yes, but what you fear is often an exaggeration, a distortion, an illusion created by poor lighting and unfortunate angles. The actual challenges you face are manageable. The real you beneath all the shadows is capable and whole. The darkness you're afraid of is just the absence of light, and light returns with each morning. Let your fears cast their shadows if they must. You don't have to fight them or deny them. Just recognize them for what they are, shadows, not the things themselves, and know that shadows, no matter how large or dark or menacing they appear, cannot hurt you. They're just shapes in the absence of light. They have no substance. They cannot touch you. Sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that the monsters are shadows, and the shadows will shrink when you bring them into the light of honest attention. You are not your fears. You are not the shadows those fears cast. You are the awareness that can see both the thing and its shadow, that can distinguish between actual danger and exaggerated perception, that can step closer and discover again and again that what looked huge from a distance is quite small up close. Rest in this truth. The garden snake is just a small creature that eats insects. The shadow was just a shadow. And you are safe. You've always been safe. The threat was never as large as it looked. It never is. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. There was a farmer named Hideaki who worked his land diligently, waking before dawn and laboring until dusk. His son, Daichi, seemed to be his opposite, lazy, sleeping late, avoiding hard work whenever possible. Hideaki was ashamed of his son and frustrated by what he saw as wasted potential. "That boy will never amount to anything," Hideaki would complain to his neighbors. "I work myself to exhaustion while he lounges under trees and daydreams. He has no ambition, no drive, no sense of responsibility." The neighbors agreed with Hideaki's assessment. They saw Daichi as a disappointment, a young man who would never succeed because he lacked his father's work ethic. Some pitied Hideaki for having such a lazy son. Others judged Daiichi harshly, predicting he would become a burden on his family and community. What no one knew, including Hideaki, was that Daiichi spent his time under those trees observing. While appearing to do nothing, he was watching everything. How water moved across the land, which areas stayed moist, and which dried quickly, where wind patterns created microclimates, and how different plants thrived in different locations. Daiichi was learning the land in ways his father, focused only on immediate work, never had. While Hideaki fought against the land's natural tendencies, trying to impose his will through hard labor, Daiichi was learning to understand the land's own wisdom. One year, a severe drought struck the region. Hideaki worked harder than ever, carrying water to his crops, trying to save them through sheer effort. But most of his crops died anyway, as did the crops of other hard-working farmers. The drought was too severe for labor alone to overcome. But Daiichi, who everyone thought was lazy, quietly directed his efforts to the areas of the farm he knew, from his observations, retained moisture longest. He planted drought-resistant varieties in the driest areas. He used the natural wind patterns he had observed to create shade and reduce evaporation. He worked with the land's characteristics rather than against them. By the end of the season, Daiichi's sections of the farm had produced a modest but real harvest, while Hideaki's sections had produced almost nothing despite his exhausting efforts. Hideaki was stunned. "How did you do this? You barely worked compared to me." "I worked differently," Daiichi explained. "While you were laboring, I was learning. While you were fighting against the land, I was understanding it. My apparent laziness was actually observation. I was working, just not in ways that looked like work to you." He showed his father the subtle features of the land he had noticed, the slight depression that collected morning dew, the rock formation that created afternoon shade, the soil composition that retained moisture better than surrounding areas. "I learned all this by watching," Daiichi said, "by sitting still and paying attention rather than constantly moving and doing." Hideaki felt something shift in his understanding. He had been so focused on visible labor, on constant activity, on the appearance of hard work that he had never stopped to actually understand what he was working with. His son, whom he had judged as lazy, had been doing a different kind of work, the work of observation, understanding, and learning. "I'm sorry," Hideaki said. "I judged you without understanding what you were doing. I thought activity was the same as productivity, that visible effort was the same as effective effort. You were working all along, just in ways I didn't recognize as work." Word spread through the village about Daiichi's success during the drought. People who had judged him as lazy began to see him differently. Some felt ashamed of their premature conclusions. Others were curious about his methods. Daiichi began teaching other farmers what he had learned. He showed them how to read the land, how to observe rather than just labor, how to work with natural patterns rather than against them. The farmers who had once thought him lazy began to value his seemingly idle observation time. "I used to think you were wasting your life under those trees," one neighbor admitted. "Now I understand you were studying. You were learning in ways that look like laziness to people who don't understand what learning can be." A Zen monk who heard this story visited Daichi. "You've learned an important lesson that many people never learn," the monk said. "You've learned that judging too quickly, based on appearances and conventional standards, often misses the truth. Your father judged you by how much visible labor you performed, but the quality of your outcomes proved that visible labor isn't the only measure of value." Daichi nodded. "I learned something else too. I learned that what looks like laziness might be rest, or observation, or a different kind of work, and that what looks like hard work might be an inefficient struggle. Appearances are misleading, outcomes reveal truth." The monk smiled. "Your story reminds people not to judge too harshly or too quickly. The lazy son might be a careful observer. The apparently wasted time might be valuable learning. The story that seems simple at first viewing often has complexity that only reveals itself later." Years passed, and Daichi became known as a wise farmer, though he still spent time sitting under trees, watching the land. His father, who had once been ashamed of him, now proudly told people, "My son taught me that there are many kinds of work, and the work that looks least like work is sometimes the most valuable." Hideaki learned to balance his own labor with periods of observation. He became a better farmer by incorporating some of his son's apparent laziness, taking time to watch and understand rather than constantly acting. One day, a young person came to Daichi asking for advice. "My parents think I'm lazy because I spend time reading and thinking instead of working constantly. They say I'll never succeed. What should I do?" Daichi smiled. "Keep reading and thinking, but also find ways to apply what you learn. Let your outcomes speak for you, not your appearance in the industry. My father thought I was lazy until he saw what I produced. Your parents will understand when they see the fruits of your different kinds of work." He paused, then added, "But also understand their perspective. To someone who values visible labor, observation looks like idleness. To someone who measures worth by constant activity, stillness looks like laziness. Don't judge them for judging you. Just prove through outcomes that your way has value too." The young person asked, "But what if I fail? What if my approach doesn't produce results?" "Then you learn and adjust," Daichi replied. "I wasn't just sitting under trees doing nothing. I was observing, learning, thinking, and planning. If my approach had failed, I would have learned from that and tried something else." The point isn't that observation is always better than labor. The point is that judging approaches too quickly before seeing their outcomes often misses value. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider who you've been judging as lazy or unproductive. What if their stillness is observation? What if their rest is preparation? What if their apparent inactivity is actually a different kind of work that you don't recognize? And what about yourself? How harshly have you judged your own times of rest or stillness? Have you internalized the belief that only visible activity counts as work? Have you dismissed the value of observation, learning, thinking, and resting because these don't look like traditional labor? Not all work looks like work. Not all productivity is visible. Not all success comes from constant striving. Sometimes the lazy son who watches patiently sees what the hard-working father who never stops moving misses. Sometimes stillness achieves what activity cannot. Sometimes the full story only reveals itself long after the first judgment is made. Rest now without judging your rest. Let yourself be Daiichi under the tree, observing, learning, preparing in ways that might not look productive to outside observers, but that create real value. The lazy son wasn't lazy. He was doing a different kind of work. And so are you, even in this moment of apparent inactivity. Rest is work. Observation is productivity. Stillness is motion that hasn't revealed itself yet. Trust that the full story of your life will prove this, even if current appearances suggest otherwise. Sleep now, not lazy, but learning. Not inactive, but preparing. Not wasting time, but using it in ways that will only reveal their value when the drought comes, and your careful observation produces a harvest where frantic labor produced nothing. There was a young dancer named Yuki who trained with single-minded devotion. She practiced hours each day, pushing her body to perfect every movement, striving to become the greatest dancer in the province. Her teachers praised her dedication. Her fellow dancers admired her discipline. She was on the path to everything she had dreamed of. Then, 1 week before the most important performance of her career, a performance that should determine her future, Yuki's ankle twisted during practice. Not badly enough to break, but enough to cause significant pain and swelling. The physician said she needed complete rest, no dancing, for at least 2 weeks. Yuki was devastated. Years of work ruined by one unlucky step. The opportunity lost, her future derailed. She sat in her room, staring at her swollen ankle, feeling bitter and cursed. An old woman who lived next door, a retired dancer named Chio, came to visit. She saw Yuki's tears, her anger, her sense of injustice. "Why did this happen?" Yuki cried. "I worked so hard. I did everything right. And now this injury destroys everything right before the most important moment." Chio sat quietly for a while, then asked, "Do you know why I stopped dancing?" Yuki wiped her eyes. "No, I assumed you retired naturally when you got older." "I didn't retire," Chio said. "I collapsed, right on stage, in the middle of a performance. My body simply gave out from years of pushing too hard, ignoring its signals, forcing it beyond its limits. I thought dedication meant never stopping, never resting, always pushing harder. My body tried to tell me I needed to slow down. Small pains, fatigue, growing stiffness. But I ignored all those messages. So finally my body had to shout, and the shout collapses." She looked at Yuki's ankle. "Your ankle is speaking to you. Maybe whispering before it has to shout. Maybe stopping you from something that would have caused greater harm." "But the performance," Yuki protested. "Will happen or won't happen," Chio interrupted gently. "But you're thinking only about what this injury prevents. Have you considered what it might be protecting you from, or teaching you?" Over the next 2 weeks, forced to rest, Yuki had time to notice things she had been too busy to see. She realized she'd been pushing her body with a kind of violence, treating it as an obstacle to overcome, rather than a partner to work with. She noticed how exhausted she had become, how the joy had drained from dancing as it became only about perfection and achievement. She watched other dancers and saw things she had been too busy striving to notice. She saw beauty in imperfect movements, in dancers who worked within their limitations rather than fighting against them. She understood, for the first time, that her obsessive pushing was driven more by fear than by love. Fear of not being good enough, of being surpassed, of failing. When her ankle healed and she returned to dancing, something was different. She danced with more awareness, listening to her body, working with it rather than against it. She found that this actually improved her dancing. The movements became more natural, less forced, more authentic. The performance she had missed. Another dancer had taken her place and performed beautifully. Yuki realized the world continued without her, that her absence wasn't the catastrophe she had imagined. Years later, Yuki became a teacher. When students would suffer injuries and feel cursed, she would tell them about her twisted ankle. Sometimes what stops us is trying to save us. Not always, but sometimes. Before you curse an injury or illness or obstacle that forces you to stop, ask yourself, what was I rushing toward? What was I ignoring? What might this pause be protecting me from or teaching me? She would tell them about Chio, about collapse on stage, about bodies that whisper before they shout. Listen to the whispers, she would say. Pain is communication, not punishment. Forced rest is sometimes exactly what we need, even though we'd never choose it ourselves. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what has stopped you, what has forced you to slow down or pause. Are you fighting against it, seeing it only as an obstacle? Or can you wonder, even briefly, whether it might be serving a purpose you can't yet see? What if the things that stop you are sometimes trying to save you from something worse? What if forced rest is actually needed rest? What if your body or your circumstances are wiser than your plans? Rest now without fighting the rest. Let yourself be stopped, paused, held still. Not as punishment, but as protection. Not as failure, but as wisdom. Something in you knows you need this rest. Trust that knowing. Let yourself be saved by the very thing that seems to be stopping you. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. In the mountains far from any town, there lived a hermit named Ryanan who had retreated from society to live in solitude. He had built a small hut beside a stream and spent his days in meditation, contemplation, and simple living. He sought no company, spoke to no one, desired only silence and solitude. Ryanan had not always been a hermit. For many years, he had lived in the capital city, working as a scholar at a prestigious academy. He had been surrounded by people constantly, engaged in endless conversations, debates, and social obligations. His days were filled with meetings, his evenings with gatherings, his mind always occupied with the opinions and expectations of others. He had been respected in those days, successful by any measure, but he had felt increasingly hollow, as if the constant engagement with others was somehow preventing him from engaging with himself. Every conversation pulled him outward. Every social obligation demanded he present a certain face, play a certain role. He began to feel like a performer in his own life, never quite sure who he was beneath all the performances. So one day, without announcement or explanation, Ryanan left. He walked away from his position, his reputation, his comfortable life, and disappeared into the mountains. He wanted only to be alone, to find in solitude what he had lost in society. For the first year, he lived in complete isolation. He built his hut with his own hands, slowly and carefully, in no particular hurry. He learned to grow simple vegetables, He learned the rhythms of the mountain, the patterns of weather, and the habits of the animals who shared the forest. He sat in meditation for hours each day, not trying to achieve anything, just sitting with the silence. The silence was difficult at first. His mind was so accustomed to constant stimulation that it created its own noise, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios, filling the quiet with internal chatter. But gradually, over months, the internal noise began to settle. Gaps appeared between thoughts. The silence became less empty and more full, filled with the subtle sounds of wind in trees, water over stones, his own breathing. Ryanan found that in this silence, he could hear things he had never heard before. Not voices or supernatural sounds, but deeper truths about himself and about life. Insights would arise naturally, not from thinking or reasoning, but from simply being present. He began to understand things he had studied for years, but never really grasped. The difference between knowledge and wisdom. The difference between being alone and being lonely. The difference between silence and emptiness. But something strange began to happen. The more Ryanan retreated into solitude, the more visitors he attracted. At first, it was just a wandering monk who happened upon his hut and asked for water. Ryanan gave him water, and the monk went on his way. But somehow, word spread. There was a hermit in the mountains, someone who had given up the world, someone who lived in complete simplicity and silence. People began to seek him out. They would make the long journey up the mountain path, arriving at his hut with questions, seeking wisdom, wanting to learn from this man who had withdrawn from society. At first, Ryanan was dismayed. He had come to the mountains precisely to escape people, to be alone. When he saw visitors approaching, he would hide inside his hut, waiting for them to leave. But they wouldn't leave. They would sit outside his door, sometimes for days, patient and persistent. Eventually, Ryanan realized that hiding was pointless. These people had traveled far to see him. The least he could do was acknowledge them. So he began to receive visitors, though reluctantly. He would listen to their questions and offer what responses came to him. He never tried to be wise or profound. He simply spoke from his experience of solitude and silence. The puzzling thing was that the more plainly he spoke, the more wisdom people found in his words. When he'd lived in the city, surrounded by people, busy with social obligations and scholarly debates, no one had sought his wisdom particularly. He had been respected, certainly, but not sought out as a teacher. Now that he had nothing to say and no desire to teach, people traveled great distances to hear from him. One day, he asked a visitor directly, "Why do you come here?" "I was a scholar once, surrounded by books and ideas and other learned people. No one traveled to seek my wisdom then. Now I live in a hut in the mountains. I've read no books in years, and I have no new ideas to offer. Why travel so far to talk to someone who has nothing to give you?" The visitor, a merchant named Taro, who had closed his business for a week to make this journey, thought carefully before answering. "In town," Taro said, "everyone is so busy talking that no one is listening. Everyone has so many ideas, so many opinions, so much they want to say that there's no space for wisdom to emerge. Conversations are just people waiting for their turn to speak, not actually hearing each other. You're different. You have silence. You have space. When you speak, even just a few words, they matter because they come from stillness rather than from the noise of a busy mind." He shifted his position on the ground where they sat. And there's something else. In the city, I'm surrounded by people, but I feel more alone than you probably do here in your solitude. Everyone wants something from me. They want my money, my influence, my agreement, my approval. Every conversation has an agenda. But you want nothing from me. You didn't ask me to come here. You gain nothing from talking to me. That makes your words trustworthy. I can actually hear them because I'm not wondering what you're trying to get from me. Another visitor, a young woman named Hana, who had been struggling with the question of whether to marry a man her family had chosen, explained her reason for coming. Everyone in my life has an opinion about what I should do, she said. My parents think I should marry this man because it's a good match for the family. My friends think I should refuse because I don't love him. Everyone is so certain, so full of advice, so ready to tell me the right answer. But you're the first person who didn't immediately tell me what to do. You just listened. And in that listening, in that space you created, I could finally hear my own wisdom. The answer was in me all along, but I couldn't hear it over everyone else's voices. Ryonan began to understand. It wasn't despite his solitude that people sought him out, but because of it. In his withdrawal from society, he had created something increasingly rare. Space, silence, presence unburdened by agenda or expectation. And people were drawn to that the way thirsty travelers are drawn to water in the desert. He noticed something else too. The wisdom people attributed to him wasn't really his wisdom at all. It emerged from the silence he had cultivated. In the stillness of his solitary life, he could hear things that the noise of society drowned out. He could see clearly because his vision wasn't constantly pulled in multiple directions. He could speak truthfully because he had no reputation to protect, no social position to defend, no need to appear wise or knowledgeable. In the city, he had been so concerned with how others perceived him, with maintaining his scholarly reputation, with not saying anything foolish, that his words had been calculated and careful. Now, with no one to impress and nothing to lose, he simply said what was true. And paradoxically, this made his words more valuable. A scholar from the academy where Ryonan had once taught made the journey to see him. The scholar, a man named Masao, who had been Ryonan's colleague, couldn't understand why Ryonan had left such a prestigious position. "You were brilliant," Masao said. "You could have become the head of the academy. You could have written books that would have been studied for generations. Instead, you're here in a hut in the mountains, accomplishing nothing. Don't you feel you've wasted your potential?" Ryonan smiled. "When I was at the academy, I was surrounded by brilliant people, impressive ideas, important work. But I felt empty. I was always performing, always trying to prove something, always concerned with how others judged me and my ideas. Here, I accomplish nothing by the world's standards, but I'm not empty anymore." "But you could have influenced so many people from that position," Masao protested. "I influence more people now," Ryonan replied quietly. "Not through my scholarship or my position, but through my presence. People come here seeking something they can't find in the busy world, and I can offer it to them precisely because I've stepped out of that busy world. If I had stayed at the academy, I would have had a position and a reputation, but I wouldn't have had what these people are seeking. Masao looked uncomfortable. What exactly are they seeking? Space, Ryanan said. Silence. Someone who will listen without agenda. Someone who isn't trying to convince them of anything or get anything from them. Someone who has stepped out of the endless competition and comparison and striving that fills the world. I couldn't offer that while I was still caught up in it myself. He gestured to the quiet forest around them. This solitude isn't empty, as you seem to think. It's full of attention, presence, awareness. When you're constantly busy, constantly engaged, constantly consuming information and experience and interaction, there's no space for anything deeper to emerge. You fill your life so completely with activity that wisdom has nowhere to appear. But when you create space, when you embrace solitude even briefly, wisdom has room to arise. Masao stayed for 3 days, and during that time, something shifted in him. The first day, he kept trying to debate and discuss, to engage Ryanan in the kind of intellectual sparring they had done at the academy. But Ryanan wouldn't engage. He would simply sit in silence or make tea or suggest they walk in the forest. At first, Masao found this frustrating, but by the second day, he began to notice something. His mind, which was usually so busy with thoughts and arguments and analyses, was beginning to quiet. In the space Ryanan created through his silence, Masao's own deeper thoughts could finally surface. By the third day, Masao understood. "You're teaching me even though you're not saying much of anything," he said. "The teaching is in the space itself, in the silence. I can hear my own wisdom because you're not filling all the space with yours." Ryanan nodded. "At the academy, we competed to be the most impressive speaker, the most brilliant thinker. We filled every silence with words, every space with ideas. But wisdom doesn't emerge from fullness. It emerges from emptiness. The sage isn't the one with the most to say, but the one who creates space for what needs to be heard." Years passed, and Ryanan's hut became something of a pilgrimage site. But he never encouraged this. He never advertised his presence or claimed any special wisdom. He simply continued living as he had been, in solitude and silence, receiving those who came to him but never seeking them out. One day, a young man arrived who reminded Ryanan of himself many years ago. The young man was ambitious, successful, recognized in his field, but he was also hollow, exhausted, playing a role rather than living a life. "Should I give it all up?" the young man asked. "Should I leave society like you did?" Ryanan looked at him carefully. "Why would you do that?" "Because you found peace here. You found wisdom. Maybe I need to become a hermit too." "I didn't find peace because I became a hermit," Ryanan said. "I became a hermit because I needed to find peace and I couldn't find it in the busy world. But the lesson isn't that everyone should flee to the mountains. The lesson is about creating space, cultivating silence, stepping back from constant busyness and engagement. You can do that without leaving society." He poured tea for both of them. Some people need to physically retreat to learn solitude. Others can cultivate it right in the middle of the busy world. The external form matters less than the internal reality. What matters is whether you create space in your life for silence, for reflection, for listening to deeper wisdom. Whether you do that in a hut on a mountain or in a house in a city, the principle is the same. The young man looked disappointed. So you're not going to tell me to become a hermit? I'm going to tell you to become familiar with solitude, Rhiannon replied. To learn to be alone without being lonely. To create spaces in your busy life where you're not consuming, not producing, not performing, just being. Maybe that means taking a walk alone each day. Maybe it means sitting in silence for an hour each morning. Maybe it means turning off all your devices for one day a week and just being present to yourself and to life. The specific form doesn't matter. What matters is that you stop filling every moment with activity and create space for something deeper to emerge. He looked out at the forest. People come here thinking I have some special wisdom to give them. But all I really offer is space and silence. And they discover that in that space, their own wisdom can finally be heard. The wisdom was always there. It was just drowned out by noise and busyness. Solitude doesn't create wisdom. It reveals the wisdom that was hidden. The young man stayed for a week, and each day Rhiannon gave him less and less instruction. By the end of the week, they would sit together for hours without speaking, just being present to the silence and to each other. And the young man found that these silent hours taught him more than all the words he had heard in years of seeking teachers and reading books. When he left, he thanked Rhiannon. I thought you would teach me something. Instead, you showed me how to hear what I already knew. That's the only teaching worth giving, Rhiannon replied. As more years passed, Rhiannon noticed an interesting pattern. The people who traveled to see him once rarely came back. It wasn't that they were disappointed, but rather that they had learned what they needed to learn. They had experienced solitude, discovered their own inner wisdom, and carried that back to their lives. They didn't need to keep returning because the teaching wasn't dependent on his physical presence. It was about a principle they could apply anywhere. A few visitors did return, usually in times of crisis or transition, and Rhiannon always received them, but he noticed that these return visits were shorter. The people knew now how to create their own space, their own silence. They came not because they needed him specifically, but because his hut represented a physical manifestation of the inner solitude they were learning to cultivate. One day, an old friend from his academy days came to visit. This friend, whose name was Kenji, had become the head of the academy, achieving the position Rhiannon could have had. He arrived looking exhausted, burdened by responsibility and expectation. I've achieved everything we once talked about achieving, Kenji said. I have the position, the respect, the influence. So why do I feel so empty? Rhiannon recognized this emptiness. It was what he had felt all those years ago, what had driven him to the mountains. Because you have everything except space, Rhiannon said. Your life is so full of accomplishment that there's no room left for being. You've filled every moment with doing, and you've lost touch with the silence beneath all the doing. But I can't just abandon everything, Kenji protested. I have responsibilities. People depend on me. I'm not suggesting you abandon anything, Rhiannon replied. I'm suggesting you find spaces within your full life where you can be empty, even brief moments of solitude, of silence, of stopping. These moments are not wasted time. They're the moments where you reconnect with who you are beneath all your roles and responsibilities. He stood up and walked to the edge of his small clearing. I came to the mountains because I needed radical solitude to remember myself. But now, I carry that solitude with me. Even when visitors are here, even when I'm engaged with others, there's a core of silence in me that remains untouched. That's what you need to find. Not external solitude necessarily, but internal solitude that you can access even in the middle of busyness. Kenji stayed for several days, and Rhiannon taught him simple practices. Sitting in silence for even 10 minutes each morning. Taking a walk alone without purpose or destination. Eating one meal a day without distraction, just noticing the food and the act of eating. Creating small pockets of solitude within a busy life. When Kenji returned to the academy, he began implementing these practices, and he found that these small moments of solitude transformed his entire experience of his busy life. He was less reactive, more present, more capable of hearing his own wisdom beneath the noise of constant demands. He wrote to Rhiannon, "I understand now what you've been teaching. Solitude isn't about being alone. It's about creating space. And that space is what allows wisdom to emerge, what allows us to hear truth, what allows us to be present rather than just constantly doing. Thank you for showing me that I didn't need to abandon my life. I just needed to find space within it." Rhiannon smiled when he read this letter. This was the real teaching. Not that everyone should become a hermit, but that everyone needs solitude in some form. Space where they're not performing, not producing, not consuming, just being. As Rhiannon grew older, he noticed that fewer visitors came, not because his reputation had diminished, but because the teaching had spread. People had learned to create their own solitude, their own silence. They didn't need to journey to a hut in the mountains because they had learned to find that mountain stillness within themselves wherever they were. One evening, as Rhiannon sat watching the sunset from his hut, he reflected on the paradox of his life. He had retreated to solitude, seeking only to be alone, and in doing so, he had touched more lives than he ever had in his busy years at the academy. By wanting nothing, he had given something valuable. By seeking no students, he had taught countless people. By embracing emptiness, he had offered fullness. The teaching wasn't really his, he realized. It was simply what emerged when space was created. The wisdom people found when they visited him wasn't his wisdom. It was their own wisdom, finally audible in the silence he created around himself. He was just a mirror, reflecting back to people what they already knew but had forgotten in the noise of their busy lives. Tonight, as you rest, you're entering into solitude. Not the solitude of a hermit in the mountains, but the solitude of sleep, of withdrawal from the day's engagements, of stepping back from constant doing into simple being. In this solitude, you might find what busy people seek from hermits: space where your own wisdom can be heard, silence where truth can emerge, emptiness where fullness becomes apparent. You don't need to travel to mountains or build a hut or give up your life. You just need to create moments like this one. Moments where you stop filling every space with activity and allow silence to speak. The wisdom you're seeking isn't somewhere else. It's here in you, waiting to be heard. But it can only be heard in silence, in solitude, in the space you create by ceasing to be constantly busy. Rest now in the solitude of this moment. Let the silence teach you. Let the space fill you. What you've been seeking in all your busy engagement with the world is here, has always been here. waiting in the quiet. Solitude doesn't attract wisdom from outside. It reveals the wisdom that was always inside, just waiting for space to emerge. Be still, be silent, be empty, and discover that emptiness is the fullness you've been seeking all along. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. In a village where everyone prided themselves on their sophistication and education, there lived a simple man named Saburo who worked as a night watchman. His job was to walk through the streets after dark, making sure all was well, that no fires had started, that no trouble was brewing. Saburo had little education. He couldn't read the classical texts that the village scholars discussed. He didn't understand philosophy or poetry. The educated people of the village looked down on him somewhat, considering him simple, perhaps even slow-witted. But Saburo had one practice that brought him deep joy. On his nightly rounds, whenever he found a puddle that reflected the moon, he would stop and gaze at it. He would crouch down beside these puddles and smile at the perfect circle of light floating in the water, no matter how small or muddy the puddle was. One night, a scholar named Masato was walking home late from a dinner party where there had been much wine and intellectual discussion. He came upon Saburo crouching beside a small puddle, staring into it with a look of wonder. "Saburo!" Masato called out, his words slightly slurred. "What are you doing down there in the mud?" "Looking at the moon," Saburo replied, not taking his eyes from the puddle. Masato laughed. "That's not the moon, you fool. That's just a reflection. The real moon is up there." He pointed to the sky, where the full moon hung bright and distant. "I know," Saburo said simply, "but I can't touch the real moon. It's too far away. This moon in the puddle, I can see it up close. I can watch it shimmer when the wind blows. I can see clouds pass across it. It's right here with me." "But it's not real," Masato insisted. "It's just an image, a copy. Why waste time looking at a reflection when you could look at the actual moon?" Saburo finally looked up at Masato. "I look at both. The moon in the sky is beautiful, but the moon in the puddle is beautiful too. And this one, I can be close to. This one shares the street with me. Why should I ignore it just because it's a reflection?" Masato shook his head and walked away, chuckling at the simple watchman's foolishness. But a traveling Zen monk had overheard this exchange. He approached Saburo and sat down beside the puddle. "May I look at the moon with you?" the monk asked. Saburo smiled and moved over to make room. Together, they gazed at the reflection in the puddle. After a while, the monk said, "That scholar thinks you're simple. He thinks you don't understand the difference between the real moon and its reflection." "I understand the difference," Saburo said quietly. "I just don't think it matters as much as he does." "Tell me what you mean," the monk said. Saburo thought for a moment, then spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "The scholar says the moon in the puddle isn't real. But I'm seeing it right now. It's making light in the water. It's changing as I watch it. How is that not real? Maybe it's not the same as the moon in the sky, but it's not nothing. It's something. And that something brings me joy." The monk nodded, saying nothing, encouraging Saburo to continue. People like Masato think some experiences are real and important, and other experiences are just reflections, just copies, not worth their time. But I don't see it that way. When I see beauty in a puddle, I'm really seeing it. When I feel peace looking at the moon's reflection, I'm really feeling it. Just because it's a reflection doesn't make my experience less real. The monk smiled broadly. You understand something that the scholar doesn't. He's so concerned with distinguishing between original and copy, between real and reflected, that he misses the truth. All experience is real experience, even if it's experience of a reflection. The joy you feel looking at this puddle moon is not reflected. It's actual joy. They sat together in silence for a while longer. Then the monk said, "There's a teaching in Zen about the moon and its reflection. It says that trying to grasp the absolute truth is like trying to grab the moon in the sky. But seeing truth in everyday life is like seeing the moon reflected in water. We can't touch the infinite directly, but we experience it through its reflections in ordinary moments. You've understood this naturally, without studying." Saburo looked puzzled. "I don't know about truth or the infinite. I just like looking at the moon in puddles." "That's exactly what I mean," the monk laughed. "The scholar knows many teachings but understands little. You know no teachings but understand much." Word of this conversation spread through the village. Some people thought it was just another example of Saburo's simplicity being mistaken for wisdom. But others began to think differently about reflections. A woman who had been dismissing her own life as less important than the lives of famous people she read about, realized that her experience of love, loss, joy, and sorrow was not a lesser version of human experience. It was human experience itself. The fact that no one wrote books about her life didn't make her life less real. A man who had been ashamed of his humble work, comparing it constantly to the prestigious careers of others, recognized that his satisfaction in work well done was not a reflected satisfaction. It was real satisfaction, no less valuable for coming from ordinary labor than satisfaction from celebrated achievement. A child who loved to draw but was told her art was just copying the real world, understood suddenly that her experience of creating was real creating, even if she was working from life rather than pure imagination. The monk stayed in the village for several weeks, and people noticed that he would often walk with Saburo on his night rounds. They would stop at puddles together, looking at reflections of the moon, stars, and lantern light. The educated people found this baffling. Why would a learned monk waste time with a simple watchman looking at puddles? But others began to join them. At first, just one or two, then more. They would walk the night streets, stopping at puddles, looking at reflected light, experiencing the strange beauty of seeing the distant brought near, the vast captured in the small. One night, Masato the scholar, humbled by wine, or perhaps by something else, joined the group. He crouched beside a puddle and looked at the moon's reflection. At first, all he could think was, "This isn't the real moon." But gradually, as he watched, something shifted. He stopped comparing the reflection to the original and simply experienced what was before him. Light in water, movement and shimmer, beauty is accessible and close. He found, to his surprise, that he was moved, not by the moon itself, which he had seen countless times, but by this moment of looking at light in a puddle. surrounded by others who are also looking, all of them sharing this simple, real experience. "I understand now," he said quietly to Saburo. "I've been so busy distinguishing between real and reflected that I forgot that all of it is real. The moon in the sky is real. The moon in the puddle is real. And my experience of looking at either one is real. Nothing is lesser just because it's a reflection." Saburo smiled. "The puddle moon is closer. I like that about it." Years later, when travelers asked what was special about this village, people would tell them about the night walks, the puddle gazing, the practice of seeing reflections not as inferior copies, but as real encounters with beauty brought near. And they would tell them about Saburo, the watchman who taught a village full of educated people, that reflection is not the opposite of reality. Reflection is reality in another form. Experience is experience, whether of original or copy, source or reflection. The joy is real. The beauty is real. The moment is real. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what experiences you've been dismissing as just reflections. What joys have you minimized because they weren't the real thing? What beauty have you ignored because it came to you secondhand, through a screen, through a retelling, through some medium other than direct contact? All experience is real experience. The peace you feel listening to these words is not reflected peace, it's actual peace. The rest you're settling into is not a copy of rest, it's real rest. You don't have to touch the moon directly to experience moonlight. You don't have to live someone else's life to experience real life. Your experience right now, reflection or not, is completely real. Rest in the truth that this moment, this breath, this experience of being here is not practice for the real thing. It is the real thing. Nothing is lacking. Nothing needs to be more direct or more authentic. This is it. In this reflection, you call your life your actual life. These reflections you call your experiences are your actual experiences. And they are enough, more than enough. They are real. In a coastal city, there lived a renowned mapmaker named Genji, who had charted more territory than any cartographer of his generation. His maps were detailed, accurate, and highly sought after by merchants, explorers, and military leaders. Every island, every coastline, every mountain range he documented was rendered with precision. But Genji had a practice that other mapmakers mocked. Whenever his knowledge ended, whenever he reached the limits of what had been explored and documented, he would leave the map blank. Large white spaces appeared on his charts, marked only with the words "unknown territory," or sometimes just left empty. Other mapmakers found this approach unprofessional. They would fill in the blank spaces with speculation, with reports from unreliable sources, with educated guesses. A map should be complete, they would argue. Blank spaces make it look unfinished. Blank spaces are honest, Genji would reply. They tell the truth, that we don't know what's there. Filling them with guesses tells a lie, that we do know. But the criticism stung, especially when clients would choose other mapmakers' complete maps over Genji's honest but incomplete ones. People wanted certainty, even false certainty. They wanted maps that told them what lay everywhere, even if those maps were partly fiction. One season, a wealthy merchant named Ichiro commissioned Genji to create a map for a trading expedition to distant islands. When Genji delivered the map, Ichiro was dismayed by the large blank areas. "What am I supposed to do with this?" Ichiro complained. "I need to know what's in these blank spaces. I need to plan my route." "What's in those spaces is unknown," Genji replied. "No reliable expedition has charted them. I can't tell you what I don't know." "But other mapmakers have filled in these areas," Ichiro protested. "They show islands, harbors, channels." "Based on speculation," Genji said. "Based on second-hand rumors and wishful thinking. If you sail using those maps, you'll be navigating by fantasy. My blank spaces at least tell you where certainty ends." Ichiro hired a different map maker who provided a complete map with no blank spaces. The expedition set sail using this fully detailed chart, confident in their route. 3 months later, the expedition returned, having lost 2 ships. They had found islands where the map showed open ocean, encountered reefs where the map showed safe passage, and wasted weeks exploring channels that didn't exist. The complete map had been worse than useless. It had been dangerous. Ichiro returned to Genji, chastened. "Your blank spaces would have saved lives. If I had known we were entering unknown territory, I would have proceeded cautiously. Instead, I trusted a map that pretended to know, and that false certainty led to disaster." "Blank spaces scare people," Genji acknowledged. "They remind us how much we don't know, how limited our understanding is. But pretending we know more than we do is worse than admitting our ignorance. The blank space says, 'Be careful here. Proceed thoughtfully. Don't assume.' The falsely filled space says, 'It's safe to trust this,' which is a dangerous lie." Word spread about Ichiro's disaster and Genji's honest maps. More clients began to value the blank spaces, recognizing them as marks of integrity rather than incompleteness. They learned to read Genji's maps differently. The detailed areas showed where knowledge was reliable. The blank areas showed where caution was needed. A young apprentice named Lin came to study with Genji. She had been trained by other map makers who filled in all spaces, and she struggled with Genji's insistence on leaving blanks. "But we can make educated guesses," Lin argued. "We know the general geography of the region. We can estimate where islands are likely to be." "And we'd be wrong half the time," Genji replied. "An educated guess isn't knowledge. It's speculation with a fancy name. If you mark speculation as if it's fact, you're lying to whoever uses your map." He spread out several maps on his table, his own with its blank spaces, and competitors' maps of the same regions with every space filled. These complete maps look more professional, more finished. But which is more honest? Which better serves someone trusting their life to the information? Lin began to understand, but still she resisted. People don't want to be told we don't know. They want answers, even imperfect ones. Then they want comforting lies rather than uncomfortable truths, Genji said. And it's not our job to provide comforting lies. Our job is to chart what's known and clearly mark what's not. The blank space is information. It tells you something important. Here be dragons, or at least here be unknowns. Proceed carefully. Over time, Lin learned to value the blank spaces. She discovered that leaving areas blank required as much skill as filling them in. You had to know exactly where certainty ended, had to resist the temptation to extend your knowledge beyond its actual limits. and had to be comfortable with admitting you didn't have all the answers. One day, an explorer returned from a region Genji had left blank on his maps. The explorer had detailed charts of what was actually there. "Your blank space wasn't really blank," the explorer said, showing Genji islands and coastlines that had been unknown before. "Now it's not blank," Genji agreed, carefully adding the new information to his map. "But it was blank until you explored it. That's how honest maps work. They grow as knowledge grows, but they never pretend to knowledge we don't have." He looked at the transformed map. "See how the blank space has been replaced with detail? That's how it should happen. First honest acknowledgement of ignorance, then actual exploration, then knowledge replacing the unknown. But some map makers skip the first step and go straight to filling in spaces with imagination, which prevents anyone from recognizing what actually needs to be explored." Years later, Genji's blank spaces became the very thing that made his maps valuable. Explorers would deliberately seek out the blank spaces on Genji's maps, knowing these marked genuinely unexplored territory rather than cartographic guesswork. Military leaders trusted Genji's maps precisely because they showed where trust should end. A historian interviewing Genji late in his life asked, "Don't the blank spaces bother you? Don't you wish you could fill in all the unknown areas before you die?" "No," Genji replied without hesitation. "The blank spaces are the most honest things on my maps. They say, 'I don't know,' which is often the truest thing a person can say. I could fill them with speculation and fantasy, making maps that look complete. But I'd rather make true maps." He gestured to his life's work, hundreds of maps, all marked with careful detail where knowledge existed and honest blankness where it didn't. "These blank spaces are my legacy. They're me admitting the limits of my knowledge, refusing to pretend omniscience, valuing truth over completeness. Every mapmaker who fills in the unknown with guesses is choosing ego over integrity. I choose integrity." The historian looked at a particularly large blank space on one map. "Will this ever be filled in?" "Perhaps," Genji said. "Perhaps someone will explore that region and bring back reliable information, or perhaps it will remain blank forever. Either way, my map is honest right now, which is all any map can be." The map maker who fills in that space with speculation is making a map that's dishonest right now, in the hope that by accident he might be correct later. That's not map making. That's gambling. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the blank spaces in your own understanding. Where are you filling in unknowns with speculation, pretending certainty you don't have, telling yourself and others you know things you actually don't? What would it mean to leave those spaces blank, to honestly mark them as unknown? The blank space isn't a failure. It's honesty. It's saying, "I don't know," instead of offering false certainty. It's admitting the limits of your understanding rather than pretending those limits don't exist. This feels vulnerable because we're taught that certainty is strength and uncertainty is weakness. But actually, false certainty is weakness disguised as strength, while honest uncertainty is strength willing to show itself. Rest now in your blank spaces. Let yourself not know what you don't know. Let yourself mark large areas of your life, your future, your understanding as unknown territory. This isn't an admission of failure. its commitment to truth. The mapmaker with blank spaces serves better than the one with false completeness. So do you. Your honest "I don't know" is more valuable than anyone's false "I'm certain." Sleep in the blank spaces tonight where truth lives. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a bustling market town, there were two merchants who sold rice side by side. One was named Kenji, the other Taro. Both had successful businesses. Both were known throughout the region. But their approaches to business could not have been more different. Kenji used scales that he had carefully adjusted to weigh slightly in his favor. Not much, just enough that most customers wouldn't notice. Over the course of a year, this small deception added significantly to his profits. He told himself everyone did it, that it was just smart business, that customers expected to be cheated a little and factored it into their calculations. Taro, on the other hand, used scales that were calibrated perfectly. He would even add a bit extra to each purchase, telling customers, better to give too much than too little. His profits were smaller than Kenji's, but his conscience was clear. Kenji would mock Taro privately. "You're a fool," he would say. "You could be making so much more. The customers don't know the difference. Why cheat yourself?" "I'm not cheating myself," Taro would reply. "I'm paying myself in peace of mind. Every transaction I make, I know I've been honest. That's worth more to me than extra profit." "Peace of mind doesn't feed your family," Kenji scoffed. "Money feeds your family." For years this continued. Kenji's business appeared more successful. He had a larger house, finer clothes, and more luxuries. Taro lived modestly, comfortable, but not wealthy. To outside observers, Kenji's approach seemed vindicated. Then one day, a wealthy lord came to the market to purchase rice for his household. He was known for being meticulous and for testing merchants' honesty. He had brought his own perfectly calibrated scales. He went first to Kenji's stall and purchased a measure of rice. Then he weighed it on his own scales. The shortage was immediately apparent. "Your scales are dishonest," the lord said coldly. Kenji's face went white. "My lord, there must be some mistake." "Perhaps your scales are inaccurate." "My scales are tested regularly by the Imperial Standards Office," the lord replied. "Yours are deliberately fraudulent. Not only will I not purchase from you, but I will ensure that everyone in my household and in my social circle knows of your dishonesty." The lord then went to Taro's stall and made the same purchase. When he weighed it on his own scales, he found that Taro had actually given more than the agreed upon amount. "Your scales are generous," the lord said with approval. "I prefer to err on the side of giving too much," Taro replied simply. "Then you have earned my business and my recommendation," the lord said. "From now on, all the rice for my household will be purchased from you, and I will tell others of your integrity." Within weeks, Taro's business had doubled, then tripled. The lord's recommendation brought customers from the wealthiest families in the region. Meanwhile, Kenji's business collapsed. Once word spread about his dishonest scales, even his regular customers stopped coming. His reputation destroyed, he eventually had to close his stall. Years later, Kenji came to Taro, humbled and seeking work. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought honesty was expensive, but dishonesty cost me everything. Taro hired him, but on one condition, that Kenji help maintain the scales, calibrating them regularly to ensure perfect accuracy. You need to rebuild your relationship with honesty, Taro said. Start here, with these scales. Every time you calibrate them, remember that integrity isn't about what others can see. It's about what you know about yourself. As Kenji worked with the honest scales day after day, something shifted in him. He had spent so many years cheating in small ways that he had forgotten what it felt like to be completely honest. The dishonesty had eaten at him in ways he hadn't even recognized, creating a constant low-level anxiety about being discovered, a subtle shame he carried everywhere. Now, working with honest scales, treating every customer fairly, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Simple peace. No anxiety about being caught. No shame about his methods. No exhausting mental calculations about how much he could get away with. One day, a customer accidentally gave him too much money. The old Kenji would have pocketed it without comment. But now, without even thinking, he called the customer back and returned the extra coins. "You've changed," Taro observed, watching this exchange. "I'm remembering who I was before I started cheating," Kenji replied. "I forgot that honesty feels good, that it's actually easier than dishonesty because you don't have to remember your lies or worry about being discovered. I thought I was taking a shortcut to success, but I was actually taking a shortcut to misery." He looked at the scales, perfectly balanced. "These scales are the most honest thing in this market. They don't calculate or scheme or try to get away with anything. They just measure truly. I spent years being more clever than these scales and less wise." Taro nodded. The scales teach a simple lesson. Integrity is its own reward. Not because good things always happen to honest people, but because living with integrity creates internal peace that no amount of profit gained through dishonesty can match. You sleep better. You walk lighter. You meet people's eyes without flinching. These things have value that can't be measured in coins. A young merchant who was just starting came to Taro for advice. "Everyone says I should adjust my scales just a little, that it's how business is done. But it feels wrong. What should I do?" Taro had Kenji answer. "I spent 20 years cheating," Kenji said, "and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to restore the character I damaged in myself. The extra profit wasn't worth it, not even close. Your scales are a mirror of your character. Keep them honest, and you keep yourself honest. Cheat them, and you cheat yourself in ways that matter far more than money." The young merchant looked at Kenji with curiosity. "But didn't you make more money by cheating?" "For a while," Kenji admitted. "But I lost it all when my dishonesty was discovered. More importantly, I lost something that took much longer to rebuild. My ability to respect myself. Every time I looked in a mirror, I saw a cheat. Every time I counted my profits, I knew they were partly stolen. Every interaction with customers involved acting, pretending, and hiding what I really was. It was exhausting and corrosive." He gestured to the perfectly balanced scales. "These scales are at peace. They have nothing to hide, nothing to defend, nothing to remember or cover up. They just are what they are. That's what integrity gives you. The peace of being what you are without pretense or deception. It's the most valuable thing I've learned, and I learned it the hard way." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own scales. Where in your life are you adjusting the balance, even slightly in your own favor? Where are you being less than completely honest, with others or with yourself? These small dishonesties might seem insignificant, but they accumulate. They create a background noise of anxiety and shame that you carry everywhere. What would it feel like to calibrate your scales perfectly? To be completely honest, even when no one is watching, even when you could get away with a small deception. Not because of fear of being caught, but because integrity itself is the reward. Because living with honest scales creates an internal peace that no amount of clever advantage taking can provide. Rest tonight in honesty. Let go of all the small ways you've been adjusting the scales. Let go of the exhausting mental work of maintaining deceptions. Be like the perfectly balanced scale, true, honest, at peace with what you are. The reward isn't somewhere in the future. The reward is the immediate relief of no longer having to hide, to calculate, to worry about being discovered. Honest scales don't lie awake at night. Neither do honest hearts. In a town known for its elaborate storytelling tradition, there arrived a performer who couldn't speak. Her name was Yuki, and she had lost her voice to an illness years before. Despite this, she claimed to be a storyteller, which puzzled the townspeople. How could someone without a voice tell stories? The town's master storyteller, a man named Jiro, who was famous for his eloquent speech and powerful voice, was particularly skeptical. "Storytelling is about words," he said dismissively. "Without words, you have nothing. You're not a storyteller, you're just a mime." But the town's curiosity was strong enough that they allowed Yuki to perform one evening in the town square. Jiro attended, expecting to prove his point about the necessity of words. Yuki stepped onto the platform, wearing simple clothes, carrying no props. She stood in silence for a long moment, then began to move. Her movements were subtle at first, just small shifts in posture, gentle expressions crossing her face. But gradually, through gesture, expression, and presence, a story began to emerge. Without a single word, she conveyed a tale of loss and discovery. Her body became a person grieving, and everyone watching felt the grief. Her face showed the journey from despair to hope, and the audience traveled that journey with her. Her hands painted images in the air that everyone could see, even though nothing visible was there. The story lasted perhaps 20 minutes. When it ended, Yuki simply bowed and left the platform. The audience sat in stunned silence, many with tears running down their faces. Jiro, the master storyteller, was shaken. He had told thousands of stories in his career, using all his skill with words, all his vocal techniques. But he had never moved an audience the way Yuki just had, without saying anything at all. He approached her later. "I don't understand. How did you do that? Without words, how did you communicate so much?" Yuki took out a small board she used for writing and wrote, "Words point to truth, but words are not truth itself. I cannot use words, so I must speak the truth directly. My presence must communicate what my voice cannot." Jiro read this and sat down heavily. "I've spent my whole life mastering words, and you just showed me that words might be the least important part of storytelling." Yuki wrote again, "Words are useful, but presence is essential. You can have perfect words with no presence, and people feel nothing. You can have no words but complete presence, and people feel everything. I didn't choose to lose my voice, but losing it taught me that what I thought was essential actually wasn't. Over the following days, Jiro spent time with Yuki, learning her way of storytelling. She showed him how much could be communicated through posture, through the quality of attention, through authentic presence. She demonstrated that silence could say more than speech, that stillness could convey more than elaborate gestures. When you use words, she wrote, you risk people hearing the words but missing the truth behind them. They get caught in analyzing what you said, agreeing or disagreeing with your choice of words. But when you communicate through presence, there are no words to argue with. People feel the truth directly. Jiro began incorporating this into his own storytelling. He still used words, but he paid more attention to presence, to silence, to the communication that happened beyond language. His storytelling deepened, became more powerful. People said something had changed, though they couldn't quite name what. One day, a young person who couldn't speak came to the town, devastated by the belief that they could never communicate effectively. Jiro brought them to meet Yuki. You think your inability to speak is a limitation, he told the young person, but this woman has shown me it's also an opportunity. An opportunity to develop forms of communication that go deeper than words, to learn to be so present that your mere being conveys what others need elaborate sentences to express. Yuki performed for the young person and afterward wrote, I grieved my lost voice for years. I thought I had lost the essential tool for human connection, but I was wrong. Presence is the essential tool. Voice is just one way among many to express presence. You haven't lost the ability to communicate. You've been allowed to master a form of communication that speaking people often neglect. Tonight, let yourself communicate without words. Let your presence speak. In the silence of rest, convey to yourself and to the universe whatever needs to be said, without saying anything at all. Words are useful, but they're not essential. Presence is essential, and your presence right now, silent and still, communicates everything that needs to be communicated. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to explain or describe or articulate. Just be here, fully present, and let that presence be the story that's being told tonight. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. There was a ship's navigator named Takeshi who prided himself on never losing his way. He had sailed the coastal waters for 20 years, and in all that time, he had never once deviated from his intended course. He relied on a compass that had been given to him by his father, a master navigator, and this compass had never failed him. Takeshi's confidence in his navigational abilities was absolute. He knew exactly where he was at all times, could calculate his position by the stars, by the currents, by the wind. His captain trusted him completely, and other sailors spoke of Takeshi as someone who could navigate through the darkest night or the heaviest fog without ever being uncertain of his position. But one day, during what should have been a routine voyage along a familiar coast, something happened that shattered Takeshi's certainty. His compass began behaving strangely. The needle wavered, spun unpredictably, and then stopped working entirely. When Takeshi tried to get his bearings from the stars, heavy clouds covered the sky. The familiar landmarks he usually used were hidden by an unusual mist. For the first time in 20 years, Takeshi was lost. His initial reaction was panic. Without his compass, without his usual reference points, he felt completely disoriented. The ship was still moving, but he had no confidence in the direction they were heading. Every decision felt uncertain. Should they continue forward or turn back? Should they anchor and wait for the fog to clear, or try to push through? The captain came to find him. "Takeshi, what's our position?" "I don't know," Takeshi admitted, the words painful to say. "My compass is broken. I can't see the stars. The landmarks are hidden. Captain, I'm lost." The captain was quiet for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Good. Maybe now you'll actually see where we are." Takeshi was confused. "But I don't know where we are." "That's the problem. You've sailed these waters for 20 years, the captain said. You've relied on your instruments and your calculations. But have you ever really looked at the water itself? Have you ever paid attention to how it feels to sail through it, rather than just measuring your position within it?" The captain walked to the rail and looked out at the misty water. "When I started sailing, I had no instruments. I learned to read the water, the wind, the subtle signs that told me where I was and where I was going. You've always had your compass, so you never develop that sense. Maybe being lost is your opportunity to find a different way of knowing." Takeshi wanted to argue, but the truth was they had no choice. The compass was broken, and no amount of worry would fix it. He would have to navigate without his primary tool, without the certainty he had always relied on. So he began to pay attention in ways he never had before. He noticed the color of the water, which changed subtly with depth and seafloor composition. He felt the temperature of the wind on his face, which varied based on what land masses it had passed over. He watched the patterns of seabirds, which could indicate proximity to shore. He listened to the sound of the waves against the hull, which changed depending on bottom depth and current patterns. All of these signs had always been there. He just had never needed to notice them because his compass had told him everything he thought he needed to know. Now, forced to rely on more subtle indicators, he discovered a whole language of navigation he had been blind to. After several hours of this intense attention, Takeshi realized something. He had a sense of where they were, not the precise, measured certainty his compass had provided, but a felt sense, an intuitive knowing based on multiple subtle cues. It wasn't as comfortable as the false certainty his compass had given him, but it felt more real, more connected to the actual experience of being on the water. He gave the captain his best estimate of their position and the direction they should sail. "Are you sure?" the captain asked. "No," Takeshi admitted, "but I'm not completely lost either. I'm somewhere in between, navigating by feel rather than by certainty." They sailed based on Takeshi's intuitive navigation. Several hours later, when the fog finally cleared, they discovered they were exactly where Takeshi had estimated, perhaps even more accurately positioned than if he had been rigidly following his compass bearing. A Zen monk was traveling on the ship, making a pilgrimage to a distant temple. He had watched Takeshi's struggle with interest. That evening, he approached the navigator. "You've learned something valuable today," the monk said. "I've learned that I've been overly dependent on my tools," Takeshi replied. "That's a humbling lesson." "More than that," the monk said, "you've learned that there are different kinds of knowing. The compass gave you one kind, precise, measurable, certain, but it was a narrow knowing. It told you your position, but nothing about the water you were moving through, the wind you were sailing on, the life of the ocean around you." He looked out at the darkening water. When you lost that narrow certainty, you found a broader knowing. Less precise perhaps, but more connected, more alive, more responsive to what's actually happening rather than what should be happening according to your instruments. Takeshi thought about this. But isn't certainty important? Don't we need to know where we are? "There are different kinds of certainty," the monk replied. "The compass gave you the certainty of measurement. But measurement isn't the same as understanding. Today, without your compass, you develop the certainty of relationship. You know where you are not because an instrument tells you, but because you're in relationship with the water, the wind, the birds, all the subtle signs. This kind of knowing is less precise but more intimate." Over the following days, even after Takeshi had replaced his broken compass with a new one, he found himself relying on it less. He had discovered that he could navigate by reading the signs around him, by paying attention to subtle cues, by trusting his felt sense of position and direction. The compass was useful for confirmation, but he no longer needed it as his primary tool. Other navigators noticed the change in Takeshi's approach. He seemed more relaxed, more connected to the sailing itself, rather than anxiously checking his instruments every few minutes. Younger navigators would ask him for advice. The most important thing, Takeshi would tell them, is to not become so dependent on your tools that you lose your own capacity to sense and understand. Tools are useful, compasses are valuable. But if you rely on them exclusively, you become helpless when they fail. And more than that, you miss the actual experience of navigating, of being in relationship with the water you're moving through. He would tell them about the day his compass broke. "I thought I was lost, and in one way I was. I had lost my usual certainty, my measured precision. But in another way, I found something I had been missing for 20 years. I found direct contact with the elements I was navigating through. I found a different kind of knowing that doesn't come from instruments but from attention and relationship." One young navigator asked, "But what if you're wrong? What if you follow your intuition and it leads you astray?" "That can happen," Takeshi admitted. "Just as following a compass can lead you astray if the compass is broken or if there's magnetic interference you don't know about. No method is perfect. But when you're navigating by attention and relationship, you notice when things don't feel right. You can adjust. When you're blindly following an instrument, you might sail confidently in the wrong direction without realizing it until it's too late." Years passed, and Takeshi's reputation changed. Instead of being known as the navigator who never lost his way, he became known as the navigator who could find his way even when lost. People understood there was a difference, and the second reputation was actually more valuable. A merchant who hired Takeshi for a difficult voyage once asked him, "What happens if we get lost?" Takeshi smiled. We probably will get lost at some point. Weather changes, conditions shift, instruments fail. But being lost isn't the problem. Staying lost is the problem. And I've learned how to find my way even when the usual markers are gone. Being lost has become part of how I navigate, not something I try to prevent at all costs. The voyage was indeed difficult, with unexpected storms and compass problems. But Takeshi navigated through all of it, sometimes with certainty, sometimes with intuition, sometimes acknowledging that he wasn't sure but making his best estimate based on all available information. The ship arrived safely and the merchant was impressed. "You seem comfortable with uncertainty," the merchant observed. "I've learned to be," Takeshi replied. "Certainty is valuable when you can have it, but most of life involves some degree of uncertainty, some degree of not knowing exactly where you are or where you're going. The question is whether that uncertainty paralyzes you or whether you can navigate through it, using whatever signs are available, trusting your judgment, adjusting as you go." He looked out at the harbor where they had docked. "That day my compass broke was one of the most important days of my sailing life. It forced me to develop capacities I had been neglecting. It taught me that there are many ways of knowing, and the most precise isn't always the most useful. It showed me that being lost can be the beginning of finding a better way." The merchant nodded thoughtfully. "I think I've been sailing through my business life the same way you used to sail, following my instruments, my plans, my certainties. And when things don't go according to plan, when my compass breaks, I panic. Maybe I need to learn what you learned." "Maybe you do," Takeshi agreed. "Maybe we all do. Because life is going to break our compasses. It's going to take away our certainties and our familiar reference points. The question is whether we fall apart when that happens, or whether we discover we have other capacities, other ways of knowing, other methods of finding our way. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what compasses have broken in your life. What certainties have you lost? What familiar reference points are no longer available? These losses can feel frightening, disorienting, like being lost at sea without navigation tools. But what if being lost isn't the disaster you think it is? What if it's an opportunity to develop new capacities, to discover ways of knowing and navigating that you've been neglecting? What if the broken compass is forcing you to pay attention in new ways, to trust senses you've been ignoring, to find your way through relationship and intuition rather than measurement and certainty? You don't need to know exactly where you are right now. You don't need perfect clarity about your direction. You're not lost in a catastrophic sense. You're just navigating without your usual instruments, which means you have to pay attention more closely, trust yourself more deeply, be more present to subtle signs and signals. Rest in the uncertainty tonight. Let yourself not know. Let yourself be somewhere between lost and found, navigating by feel, trusting that you have capacities beyond your usual tools. The compass will break sometimes. That's not failure. That's life inviting you to find a different way, a deeper way, a way that connects you more intimately with the journey itself. You know more than you think you know. You can find your way even when you can't measure your position. Being lost is just another form of navigation, one that requires more attention, more presence, more trust, and sometimes Being lost leads you to places you never would have discovered if you had stayed on your carefully plotted course. Sleep now in the uncertainty. You don't need a compass to rest. You don't need to know where you are to be okay right here. Let yourself drift without reference points, trusting that you'll find your way when morning comes, not through certainty, but through attention, not through instruments, but through relationship with whatever each moment brings. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. There was a young man named Koji whose father had died, leaving substantial debts. The creditors came to Koji expecting him to assume responsibility for his father's obligations. Koji, believing this was his duty as the son, worked himself nearly to death trying to repay the money his father had borrowed. For 3 years, Koji labored from dawn to dusk. He took multiple jobs, spent almost nothing on himself, and sent every coin he earned to his father's creditors. His health suffered. His youth was consumed by obligation. He became bitter and resentful, angry at his father for leaving him this burden. A traveling monk named Bankei came to the town and noticed Koji's exhaustion. He asked the young man why he looked so worn. "I'm repaying my father's debts," Koji explained. "He died owing money, and as his son, the responsibility falls to me." "Did you borrow this money?" Bankei asked. "No, my father did." "Did you receive any benefit from what the money purchased?" "No, he borrowed it for his gambling and drinking." "Then why are you repaying it?" Koji looked at the monk in confusion. "Because I'm his son. Because the creditors say I must. Because it's my duty." Bankei shook his head gently. "You can choose to repay debts that aren't yours. That's your choice, but understand that you're choosing it, not that you must do it. Your father's choices were his own. His debts were his own. They died with him. The creditors may pressure you, society may tell you it's your obligation, but actually you're free. You've been carrying a burden that was never yours to carry." Koji felt anger rise in him. "So I should just abandon my father's debts? That would dishonor his memory." "Is working yourself to death to pay for his gambling honoring his memory?" Bankei asked quietly. "Or is it perpetuating the harm he caused? Your father made choices that hurt himself and others. You don't honor him by destroying yourself for those choices. You honor him by living differently, by not continuing the cycle of harm." This conversation shook something loose in Koji. He had never questioned the assumption that his father's debts were now his. Everyone had told him this was his duty, and he had accepted it without examination. He began asking questions. Legally, were his father's debts actually his responsibility? He discovered they were not. The creditors had relied on his sense of filial duty and his ignorance of his legal rights. He had been free all along, but hadn't known it. Koji stopped making payments on his father's debts. The creditors threatened and complained, but they had no legal claim on him. He used his labor now to build his own life, to recover his health, to create a future not defined by his father's mistakes. Some people in the village criticized him. "He abandoned his father's debts," they whispered. "He has no filial piety." But Bankei, before leaving town, gave Koji final words of wisdom. Carrying debts that aren't yours doesn't make you virtuous. It makes you a volunteer victim. Your father's poor choices created consequences. Those consequences were his to face, not yours to inherit. You can feel compassion for him without taking on burdens that aren't yours. You can love someone without destroying yourself for their mistakes. Years later, when Koji had built a successful life and even helped others in his community who were struggling, someone asked him, "Don't you feel guilty for not repaying your father's debts?" "No," Koji replied. "I felt guilty for years while I was killing myself trying to repay them. But the guilt was about other people's expectations, not about actual obligation. My father's debts were his own. His choices were his own. I honor his memory better by living well and helping others than I would by destroying myself for mistakes I didn't make." Tonight, what debts are you carrying that were never yours? What burdens did you inherit from parents, from past relationships, from circumstances beyond your control? What shame or obligation have you assumed just because someone told you that you must? You're allowed to put these down. You're allowed to say, "This was never mine to carry." The debts of others, the mistakes of the past, the expectations of people who had no right to place them on you. None of these are truly yours unless you choose to make them so. Rest tonight in freedom from all inherited burdens. You're responsible for your own choices, not for everyone else's. Let the dead bury the dead. Let old debts stay where they belong. You're free. At the edge of a village stood a house whose small garden received almost no direct sunlight. Tall buildings on either side cast shadows that leave the garden in shade for all but an hour each day. The previous owners had tried repeatedly to grow sun-loving flowers and vegetables, but everything either died or grew weak and spindly, stretching desperately toward the brief sliver of light. When Yuki moved into the house, neighbors warned her about the garden. "Nothing grows there," they said. "The shade is too deep. Better to pave it over and use it for storage." But Yuki looked at the shaded space differently. "It's not that nothing can grow here," she said. "It's that sun-loving plants can't grow here. The garden isn't bad. It's just suited for different things than the previous owners were trying to grow." She began researching plants that thrived in shade, ferns that loved the dim moisture, hostas with broad leaves that caught what little light appeared, shade-loving flowers that bloomed in muted colors, but with delicate beauty. Instead of fighting the garden's nature, she worked with it. Within a year, Yuki's shaded garden was lush and beautiful. It didn't look like sunny gardens with their bright flowers and robust vegetables. It had a different aesthetic, subtle, cool, mysterious. The greens were deeper, the flowers were more delicate. The whole space had a quality of quiet richness that sun-blasted gardens never achieved. Neighbors who had declared the space hopeless came to see what Yuki had created. They were amazed, though some were still dismissive. "It's pretty," one neighbor said, "but it's not a real garden. Real gardens have tomatoes and sunflowers and bright colors. Your garden is just making the best of bad conditions." "Are its conditions bad?" Yuki asked. "Or just different conditions?" "These ferns and hostas are barely surviving. They're thriving. They're doing exactly what they evolved to do in exactly the kind of environment they need. The previous owners failed because they tried to grow sun plants in shade. I'm succeeding because I'm growing shade plants in shade." she touched a particularly lush fern. This plant would die in full sun. It needs shade. For this fern, my garden isn't difficult conditions, it's ideal conditions. The mistake is measuring all gardens by sun garden standards and calling everything else deficient. A young woman named Hannah, who lived nearby, was struck by this perspective. Hannah had always felt like she was growing in the shade in difficult circumstances that made the kind of success others achieved impossible for her. She had health issues that limited her energy. She lived in poverty, which restricted her opportunities. She lacked the family support that others took for granted. Everyone told her she needed to overcome these limitations, to find more light, to transform her difficult conditions into easier ones. But what if, like Yuki's garden, she just needed to stop trying to grow like a sun plant and instead discover how to thrive as a shade plant? She came to talk with Yuki about this idea. "I feel like I'm always failing," Hannah admitted, "because I can't achieve what healthy, wealthy people with family support achieve. I'm trying to grow tomatoes in shade, basically. But I don't know what the equivalent of shade plants would be for a human life." Yuki walked her through the garden, explaining her choices. "See how I chose plants that need less energy? That's like you choosing work that fits your energy levels rather than jobs that demand more than you can give. See how I selected plants that thrive in cool, moist conditions? That's like you finding strengths that develop specifically because of your limitations, not despite them." She pointed to a particularly beautiful shade flower. This would never survive in full sun. Its delicate petals would burn. But here, protected from harsh light, it blooms with a beauty that sun lovers can't achieve. Your limitations might protect you from certain kinds of harm while allowing you to develop qualities that people in easier conditions never develop. Hannah began to reconsider her entire life. What if she stopped measuring herself by sun garden standards? What if she found shade garden ways to thrive? She had deep empathy, probably developed through her own suffering. She had patience, learned through chronic illness. She had creativity in making do with little, born from poverty. These weren't consolation prizes for failing at normal success. These were actual strengths, shade plant qualities that were valuable in themselves. She started making different choices. She took a job that paid less, but required less energy, allowing her to work sustainably rather than constantly burning out. She developed friendships with others who lived in shade, creating community with people who understood difficult circumstances. She stopped apologizing for needing things that others didn't need, recognizing that shade plants legitimately need different care than sun plants. Word spread about Yuki's garden and the perspective it represented. People who felt they were growing in difficult conditions began to see themselves differently. A man with learning disabilities stopped trying to compete in academic environments and found work that used his practical intelligence. A woman with anxiety stopped forcing herself into high-stress social situations and built a life that honored her need for quiet. A family with limited income stopped feeling inadequate for not achieving wealth and found richness in their strong relationships. The shade garden teaching, as people began to call it, spread beyond individuals to organizations. A school started creating shade garden programs for students who couldn't thrive in standard classroom environments. a business developed positions specifically designed for people with limitations that made traditional jobs difficult. A community center created spaces for people who needed accommodations that mainstream spaces didn't provide. Not everyone appreciated this perspective. Some critics said it encouraged people to accept limitations rather than overcoming them. You're telling people to give up, they argued, to accept that they can't thrive in normal conditions rather than working to change their circumstances. Yuki would answer these critics by walking them through her garden. Look at these plants. Should they be working to become sun plants? Should they be trying to overcome their shade-thriving nature? Or should they be celebrated for being excellent at what they actually are? She would point to a struggling plant that needed more light. Sometimes you do need to change conditions. This plant is genuinely in the wrong place. It needs to be moved to a more light-filled place. But most of these plants, they're exactly where they should be, thriving in conditions that sun plants would call impossible. The question isn't whether to overcome all limitations. The question is whether your limitations are like shade for a shade plant, the right conditions for your actual nature, or like shade for a sun plant, wrong conditions that need to change. A teacher named Nobuo applied this to his classroom. He stopped trying to make all students thrive in the same way. He recognized that some students were sun plants who needed bright, fast-paced, competitive environments. Others were shade plants that needed quiet, slow, supportive conditions. Trying to make shade plant students compete in sun plant ways was as futile as trying to grow ferns in full sun. He created different pathways through his curriculum, different ways to demonstrate learning, and different environments within his classroom. And he found that students he had previously considered struggling were actually thriving. They just needed shade garden conditions to show what they could do. Years later, Yuki's garden became something of a pilgrimage site for people living in difficult circumstances. They would come to see that lushness was possible even in shade, that beauty didn't require ideal conditions, that thriving could look different from what sunny gardens showed. Yuki, now elderly, would sit in her garden talking with visitors. The hardest thing, she would tell them, is stopping comparing yourself to sun gardens. Stop measuring your lushness by their standards. Stop trying to be bright when your beauty is subtle. Once you accept that you're a shade garden, once you stop apologizing for it and start working with it, you discover possibilities you never knew existed. She would touch the ferns and hostas she had planted decades earlier, now mature and magnificent. These plants are barely surviving in bad conditions. They're thriving in ideal conditions for their nature. The shade isn't their obstacle, it's their element. And the same might be true for you. Tonight, as you rest, you might reconsider the shade you're growing in. The difficult conditions you've been taught to see as obstacles might actually be the right environment for who you actually are. Not who you think you should be, not who sun gardens demand, but who you actually are. Stop trying to grow sun plants in shade. Stop measuring yourself by standards designed for different conditions. Start asking, what does thriving look like for a shade plant? What can I grow that loves these exact conditions? What beauty can emerge specifically because of these limitations, not despite them? Rest now in your shade garden. Let yourself be a fern, a hosta, a delicate shade flower. Stop burning yourself trying to bloom in full sun. Sink into the cool moisture of your actual conditions. and discover what wants to grow there. Shade isn't a deficiency, it's just a different light, and different light creates different beauty. Trust that yours is worth growing. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a village known for its textiles, there lived a master weaver named Hana, whose tapestries were sought after throughout the region. Her work was meticulous, each thread placed with precision, each pattern executed exactly as planned. She would design a piece completely in her mind before beginning, then weave it exactly as envisioned, allowing no deviation from her original plan. One day, Hana was working on her most ambitious piece yet, a large tapestry commissioned by a wealthy patron. She had been weaving for 3 weeks, and the pattern was emerging beautifully, exactly as she had planned it. The colors flowed in perfect harmony, the design unfolding with mathematical precision. Then disaster struck. As she reached for a spool of thread, her elbow knocked over a cup of tea. The liquid spilled across her loom, soaking into the partially completed tapestry and breaking several threads. Hana stared at the damage in horror. Weeks of work, ruined. The pattern disrupted. The threads broken in places she hadn't planned. Her carefully designed vision destroyed by one careless moment. Her first impulse was to tear it all down and start over. But the patron needed the piece in 2 weeks, and starting over would make meeting the deadline impossible. She would have to work with the damaged tapestry somehow. For a full day, Hana sat before the loom, paralyzed by frustration and disappointment. She kept seeing the tapestry as it should have been, comparing it to the broken reality before her. Every time she looked at the damaged sections, she felt her failure. Finally, her grandmother, who had taught Hana to weave, came to visit. The old woman looked at the damaged tapestry for a long time, saying nothing. "It's ruined," Hana said miserably. "All my planning, all my vision, destroyed." Her grandmother touched one of the broken threads gently. "Or changed," she said. "Ruined and changed are not the same thing." "But it's not what I planned. The pattern is broken." "Then make a new pattern," her grandmother said simply. "One that includes the break. Use the interruption as part of the design rather than fighting against it." Hana wanted to argue, wanted to insist that the original plan was the only right way. But she looked at her grandmother's eyes, which had seen 70 years of life's interruptions and changes, and stayed quiet. "When I was your age," her grandmother said, settling into a chair, "I believed that good weaving meant perfect execution of a predetermined plan. Any deviation was failure. Any interruption was disaster. I would throw away pieces that didn't match my vision, even if they were beautiful in their own way." She smiled, remembering. "Then one year, I was weaving a ceremonial cloth for a temple. I had planned an elaborate pattern of lotus flowers, but halfway through, I became very ill. I couldn't work for 2 months. When I finally returned to the loom, I had forgotten exactly what I'd planned. My hands had changed from the illness. My eyes saw colors slightly differently. I couldn't recreate my original vision even if I tried." "What did you do?" Hana asked. "I wept at first," her grandmother admitted. "I felt like I had failed. But then I started weaving again, not trying to force my memory of the original plan, but responding to what was actually there on the loom. Where I had forgotten the exact pattern, I improvised. Where my hands moved differently, I let them. Where my changed eyes saw colors differently, I trusted them. She leaned forward, and you know what? That piece became the most celebrated work I ever created. People still talk about it. They say it has a quality that my other work doesn't have, a kind of depth and authenticity. Because it wasn't just my plan executed perfectly. It was my plan interrupted by life, changed by circumstance, transformed by letting go of control. Hannah looked at her damaged tapestry with new eyes. What if she stopped seeing it as her failed plan and started seeing it as an opportunity? What if the broken threads weren't mistakes but invitations to create something she never would have imagined? She began to weave again, but differently. Where threads were broken, she wove in new colors, creating unexpected contrasts. Where the pattern was interrupted, she let it flow in new directions. Where tea stains had discolored sections, she added complementary shades that made the stains look intentional, like watercolor washes. The work became a dialogue between her original plan and the accidents that had interrupted it. She found herself excited by this conversation, by the surprise of not knowing exactly what would emerge, by the creativity required to work with interruption rather than against it. 2 weeks later, when she delivered the finished tapestry to the patron, she held her breath. It was not what she had promised. It was not what anyone had expected. The patron stared at it for a long time. Hannah prepared herself for disappointment, perhaps even for the commission to be rejected. Then the patron turned to her with tears in his eyes. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. There's something alive about it, something that speaks of real life rather than perfect planning. This pattern here, these unexpected color changes, this flow that seems both intentional and spontaneous. How did you create this?" Hannah told him the truth about the spilled tea, the broken threads, the ruined plan, the choice to work with the damage rather than starting over. The patron listened and nodded slowly. So this beauty came from accident and interruption, from things going wrong, from embracing what went wrong, Hannah clarified, from letting the interruption become part of the design rather than the enemy of it. The patron hung the tapestry in the place of highest honor in his home. People came from distant cities to see it. They would stand before it and feel something they couldn't quite name, a quality of authenticity that perfectly planned and executed works somehow lacked. Hannah's approach to weaving changed after that. She still planned her pieces, still brought skill and intention to her work, but she no longer demanded that reality conform perfectly to her plans. When threads broke, when colors ran differently than expected, when her hands moved in ways she hadn't intended, she learned to see these interruptions as collaborators rather than enemies. Her later work was marked by this quality of collaboration with accident. She became known for tapestries that felt alive, that contained both intention and surprise, that spoke of a weaver who had learned to dance with interruption rather than fight against it. When students came to learn from her, she would tell them the story of the spilled tea and the broken threads. "Life will interrupt your plans," she would say. This is not a problem to solve, but a truth to accept. The question is not how to prevent interruption, but how to weave it into the pattern. How to let it teach you, change you, take you places your plan never would have gone. She would show them her most celebrated piece, the one born from disaster. This taught me that my plans are not sacred, they're just starting points. What emerges when plan meets reality, when intention meets accident, when control meets surrender, that's where the real art lives. Not in perfect execution of a predetermined vision, but in the creative response to all the ways reality refuses to conform to our vision. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider how life has interrupted your plans, the ways things haven't gone as you envisioned, the broken threads in your own tapestry. Are you still fighting against these interruptions, trying to force reality back to your original plan? Or can you begin to weave them into a new pattern, one you never would have imagined, but that might be more beautiful, more authentic, more true than your original vision? Your life is not a failed plan. It's a collaborative creation between your intentions and reality's interruptions. And sometimes the interruptions are the best parts, the threads of color you never would have chosen, but that make the whole piece come alive. Rest now in acceptance of all the broken threads, all the spilled tea, all the ways your carefully laid plans have been disrupted. These are not failures. They're invitations to create something new, something real. Something that could only emerge from the collaboration between what you intended and what actually happened. On a mountainside where strong winds blew constantly from the west, there grew a forest of pine trees. Most of the trees had learned to grow straight despite the wind, their trunks vertical, their branches reaching skyward. It was what trees were supposed to do after all, grow up toward the light. But there was one tree that grew differently. From its earliest days as a sapling, this tree had bent toward the east, growing almost horizontally rather than vertically. Its trunk ran parallel to the ground for several feet before curving upward. Its branches spread in unusual directions, creating a shape unlike any other tree in the forest. The other trees, if trees could speak, might have considered this tree malformed. It wasn't doing what trees were supposed to do. It wasn't following the pattern that all the other trees followed. It was crooked, bent, wrong. A woodcutter named Jin would come to this forest regularly to select trees for timber. He always chose the straightest, tallest trees with vertical trunks that would yield straight boards. Trees that had grown properly. He would walk past the sideways growing tree without even considering it. What use was a tree that grew horizontally? It couldn't be milled into straight lumber. It was a waste of space in the forest, taking up ground where a proper tree could grow. Years passed. The sideways tree continued its unusual growth, seemingly unbothered by its difference from the other trees. It didn't try to straighten itself or grow more vertically. It simply continued being what it was, spreading its branches in its own unique pattern. One day, a master boat builder named Keiko came to the forest. She was looking for wood to build a special ship, one that would need to navigate difficult coastal waters. She needed timber with particular curves, wood that could form the ribs and hull of a vessel that would bend with the waves rather than fight against them. She walked through the forest, examining tree after tree. The straight, vertical ones were impressive, certainly. Well-formed, exactly what most people wanted. But they weren't what she needed. Then she saw the sideways growing tree. She stopped and stared. Jin the woodcutter happened to be nearby. "Don't waste your time with that one," he called out. "It's malformed, useless for lumber." But Keiko approached the tree slowly, running her hands along its horizontal trunk, examining the unusual curves of its branches. "This tree," she said quietly, "this tree is exactly what I need. These curves are perfect for a ship's hull. This horizontal strength is ideal for bearing the weight of a deck. This unusual growth pattern that you call useless is actually precious. This tree has exactly the qualities I've been searching for." She turned to Jin. "You've been walking past treasure because you were only looking for what trees usually look like. But sometimes the unusual one, the different one, the one that doesn't fit the standard pattern, that's the one with the most value, just for a different purpose than you imagined." Jin helped Keiko harvest the sideways tree, and he watched as she worked with the wood. Every unusual curve, every strange angle, every part that would have been useless for straight boards turned out to be perfect for the ship's construction. The tree's horizontal trunk became the keel. Its curved branches became the ribs. Its unusual shape, which had made it worthless for Jin's purposes, made it invaluable for Keiko's. The ship that was built from that tree became legendary. It handled rough seas better than ships built from straight timber. It flexed with the waves rather than fighting them. It had a strength that came not from rigid straightness, but from curved resilience. Years later, when Jin told this story, he would say, "I learned something from that tree. I had been judging it by one standard. Could it give me straight boards? When it couldn't, I dismissed it as worthless. But it wasn't worthless. It was just designed for a different purpose, one I couldn't see because I was only looking for what I expected trees to be." He would walk people through the forest and point out other unusual trees. "See that one with the split trunk?" Most people would call it damaged, but a furniture maker could create something extraordinary from those two main branches. That one there that's gnarled and twisted. Useless for construction lumber, but a carver could make sculptures from it that straight wood could never achieve. Each tree is growing its own way, and each way has value for someone who can see it. The sideways tree's story spread beyond that forest. It became a teaching that parents would share with children who felt different, who didn't fit the standard pattern, who grew in unusual ways. "You're not wrong," parents would say to a child who struggled in conventional schools but showed brilliance in other areas. "You're not broken," they would say to a child who couldn't sit still but had extraordinary physical abilities. "You're like the sideways tree, growing in your own direction, and someday someone will come along who needs exactly what you are, who sees that your difference is not a flaw, but a gift." A young woman named Yuri heard this story when she was struggling with feeling like she didn't fit anywhere. She wasn't good at the things her family valued. She didn't have the skills her community praised. She felt broken, wrong, useless. But the story of the sideways tree changed something in her understanding. What if she wasn't failing to be what others expected? What if she was succeeding at being what she actually was, and she just hadn't found the place where that was valued yet? She stopped trying to force herself into shapes that didn't fit her nature. She stopped judging herself by standards that didn't account for her particular gifts. She simply continued growing in her own direction, trusting that somewhere, someone would need exactly what she was, and eventually, she found her place. Not in the conventional path her family had hoped for, but in work that required exactly her unusual combination of skills and perspectives. What had seemed like weaknesses in one context became strengths in another. What had seemed like failure to grow properly was actually success at growing authentically. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider the ways you've judged yourself for not growing straight, for not fitting the standard pattern, for being different from what seems normal or expected. What if those differences aren't flaws? What if you're like the sideways tree, growing exactly as you should, waiting for the boat builder who needs precisely your unique shape? You don't have to force yourself into a form that doesn't fit your nature. You don't have to straighten what grows curved or vertically climb when you naturally spread horizontally. Your path is your own. Your shape is your own. And somewhere, someone needs exactly what you are, not despite your differences, but because of them. Rest now in acceptance of your own unique growth pattern. You're not wrong. You're not broken. You're just different. And different is not less than. It's just different. Let yourself grow in your own direction and trust that your unusual shape has value, even if you can't see it yet. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. There was a monk named Ryusei who lived simply in a small temple at the edge of a town. He owned very little, just what was necessary for his practice and daily life. Among his few possessions was a pair of sturdy sandals he had received as a gift from his teacher when he first became a monk. They were well made, comfortable, and had served him faithfully for 7 years. One morning, Ryusei woke to discover his sandals were gone. Someone had stolen them during the night. He stood at the temple entrance, looking at the empty space where his shoes had been, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at the theft, worry about how he would afford new sandals on no income, sadness at losing a gift from his beloved teacher, attachment to these particular shoes that had carried him so many miles. As he stood there, a neighbor passed by and noticed his bare feet. "Ryusei-san, where are your shoes?" "Someone took them during the night," Ryusei replied. "What? That's terrible. You should report it to the magistrate. We can't have thieves in this neighborhood." But Ryusei shook his head slowly. No need to involve the magistrate. "But you need shoes!" "And the thief needs to be punished." Ryusei was quiet for a moment, watching the morning light spread across the ground. Then he said something that puzzled the neighbor. "I hope they fit him well." The night was cold. Perhaps his need for shoes was greater than mine. The neighbor went away confused, but Ryusei meant what he said. As he sat with his initial reactions of anger and loss, he began to examine them more carefully. Why was he so upset? Because someone had taken something that belonged to him. But had it really belonged to him? He hadn't made the sandals himself. They had been given to him by his teacher, who had received them from someone else, who had purchased them from a craftsman who made them from materials that came from plants and animals, which came from the earth. At what point in this chain had the sandals become his? He had been using them, yes, they had been in his possession. But possession is temporary, always. Whether stolen, worn out, or outlived by his own death, those sandals were never going to be his permanently. They were just passing through his life for a time, and now they had passed on to someone else. This understanding brought a strange peace. Instead of focusing on what he had lost, Ryusei found himself thinking about the person who had taken the shoes. What desperation drives someone to steal shoes from a poor monk? What circumstances had brought them to this temple in the middle of the night, in need of footwear? Ryusei spent the day walking barefoot, which he hadn't done since childhood. He noticed things he never noticed while wearing shoes. The texture of different surfaces beneath his feet. The temperature of stones that had been in sun versus shade. The careful attention required to avoid sharp objects. The humility of going barefoot while others wore shoes. That evening, another monk from a neighboring temple visited. Hearing about the stolen sandals, he immediately offered Ryusei a spare pair he had. Ryusei accepted gratefully, but he noticed something. If he had spent the whole day angry about the theft, bitter about his loss, he would have missed the insights that came from walking barefoot. He would have missed the kindness of this monk's offering. He would have poisoned his whole day with resentment over something that was already gone and couldn't be changed. Instead, by letting go of attachment to the stolen shoes, by wishing well for the thief, by being present to what actually was rather than resenting what was no longer, he had passed the day in relative peace. A student who heard this story asked Ryusei, "But Master, didn't you feel angry? Isn't anger at injustice natural?" "Of course I felt angry," Ryusei replied. For about 10 minutes, anger arose, just as it arises for anyone when something is taken from them. But then I had a choice. I could feed that anger, nurture it, build stories around it, carry it with me all day, letting it poison my mind and disturb my peace. Or I could acknowledge it, let it pass, and choose a different relationship with what had happened. "But the thief should be punished," the student insisted. "What he did was wrong. Perhaps he will be punished by his own conscience," Ryusei said. "Perhaps he is punished already by whatever circumstances drove him to steal from a poor monk. But whether he is punished or not is not my concern. My concern is whether I will punish myself by holding resentment or free myself by letting go." He looked at his new sandals, the gift from his fellow monk. "These shoes came to me because those shoes left me. If I had been so attached to the old shoes that I refused to accept new ones, I would still be barefoot." Life is constantly taking things from us and giving things to us. We suffer when we cling too tightly to what's being taken, and when we refuse to receive what's being offered. The student was quiet, thinking about this teaching. Finally, he asked, "So you're saying we shouldn't care about our possessions? We should just let people take whatever they want?" "I'm saying we should hold our possessions lightly," Ryusei replied. "Use them while we have them, appreciate them, but know that we never truly own anything. Everything we think we possess is just temporarily in our care. When it leaves us, whether through loss or theft or natural decay, we can let it go without adding the suffering of clinging to the simple fact of its absence." He smiled, remembering the cold night when his shoes were taken. "That thief taught me something valuable. He showed me how attached I was to those sandals, how much of my sense of security was tied to possessions. He gave me an opportunity to practice letting go. In a way, though it wasn't his intention, he gave me a gift even as he took something from me. Years later, Rousseau would tell people, "The shoes I lost mattered less than what I learned by losing them. The thief took my sandals, but gave me a teaching about non-attachment. Most of what we think we own, we don't. Most of what we think we need, we don't. And most of what we think would destroy us to lose, we can actually live without quite peacefully." Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what you're holding too tightly. What possessions, what relationships, what ideas, what version of yourself are you clinging to, fearing their loss? What if you held these things the way Ryusei learned to hold his sandals? With appreciation while they're present, with acceptance when they leave. Nothing you possess is truly yours to keep. Everything is temporary, passing through your life for a time. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy these things or care for them. It means you don't have to suffer when they inevitably pass on. Rest now in empty hands, knowing that holding loosely allows life to flow through your grasp. What needs to stay will stay. What needs to go will go. And you can be at peace either way, not because you don't care, but because you understand that ownership was always an illusion and loss was always inevitable. Let go tonight of everything you've been trying so hard to hold onto, and notice how light your hands feel when they're finally open. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.